I apologize for asking, but are you saying you'd rather I not come to the wedding tomorrow? I want to make sure I understand your meaning clearly. What I meant, I believe Marty would also prefer it if his less fortunate sister, who works at a supermarket, didn't attend. It was the first time I truly felt the sting of being looked down upon. They claimed it was for Marty's benefit. Invoking my brother's name left me speechless. My name is Joanna. When I was in 9th grade, our parents passed away in a car accident, leaving Marty and me alone. At first, I couldn't grasp the enormity of it. With no reliable relatives, our teacher stepped in to handle the funeral arrangements and other necessities. I could only watch, tightly holding Marty's hand. It was only after the funeral, in our quiet house, that the reality sank in. I wept uncontrollably, tears flowing until exhaustion claimed me. When I awoke, a strange calm had settled over me, as if I had expended a lifetime's worth of tears in one night. With a clear mind, I pondered how best to move forward, ensuring Marty's well-being above all else. That was my priority. Opting not to pursue college, I decided to enter the workforce instead. Concerns about finding a job without a high school diploma nagged at me, but a classmate's parent who owned a supermarket came through with an opportunity. Would you be interested in working here? The pay isn't great, but the team is wonderful. While others relished their high school experience in crisp new uniforms, I couldn't help but envy them. Yet practicality dictated I had to work to make ends meet. Thankfully, Marty understood our circumstances. When he returned from school, he pitched in with dinner and chores. Knowing Marty's kind nature, I wanted him to keep enjoying what he loved most, playing soccer. Marty considered quitting due to the travel costs for matches, but both the coach and I persuaded him to stay. I might be biased, but I truly believe Marty has a natural talent for soccer. On game days, I would either take time off work or rearrange my schedule just to be there to support him. Initially, other parents were taken aback to see a sister, not a parent, cheering Marty on. However, as Marty's skills on the field flourished and my encouragement grew louder, the curious glances gradually faded away. Once Marty reached high school, scouts from colleges and even professional leagues began attending his games. This attention ultimately helped him secure an athletic scholarship for college. When it was time for college, Marty declared, "I'm going to work. I can't keep relying on you, sis." I shook my head firmly. "I want you to keep pursuing your dreams, Marty. Through you, I get to experience the youth I missed." Marty frowned slightly at my words. "I'll make it to the pros for sure and take care of you, sis." "Thank you, but I don't need you to worry about me. My only dream is to see you become a professional soccer player." I smiled warmly to reassure him. "I'll be fine." "Sure, sis. You're the one who's always working hard," Marty conceded. But in my eyes, Marty was the true embodiment of hard work. True to his word, Marty turned professional after excelling in college. I continued at the supermarket, eventually scaling back to part-time hours. Time flew by, almost 15 years since I first started working there. One evening during a break, a text from Marty lit up my phone. It read, "There's someone I want you to meet." I jumped up in excitement, momentarily forgetting I was in the break room at the supermarket. The news that Marty had found someone special filled me with such joy that tears streamed down my face as I shared the story with my coworkers and manager. Marty had always been a good-natured kid, hardly ever asking for anything. He shed his rebellious streak entirely after our parents passed away. He even considered giving up soccer, his greatest passion, just to support me. And now, I was about to meet someone who meant a lot to him. Could I be any happier? The text message contained all the details: date, time, and the name of a restaurant in a nearby hotel. When I shared the news with my coworkers, they insisted, "You've got to dress up." I was usually mindful of my appearance, but I didn't own anything particularly fancy. After finishing my part-time shift, my coworkers insisted on taking me to the shopping district. We visited boutiques I rarely frequented, trying on various outfits until I settled on a classy yet simple dress. From there, we ventured to a large mall where I splurged on branded makeup and received a tutorial. Despite the exhaustion that comes from shopping after work, it felt like a welcome release. I had eagerly anticipated this day, counting down on my calendar for weeks. A few days later, I nervously sat in the hotel lobby where we had agreed to meet, dressed in the outfit I had chosen with my coworkers' help. My attempt at makeup followed the tutorial I had received, hoping I had done it justice. As I anxiously waited, I suddenly heard a familiar voice behind me calling out, "Sis." Slowly turning around, I saw Marty in a suit standing beside a stunning woman with long hair. "Sis, you look stunning." I made sure to dress up too, Marty exclaimed proudly as he introduced me to someone special. I chuckled at his remark, which seemed to please him. Let me introduce you. This is my fiancée, Vanessa. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Vanessa, your future sister-in-law. She greeted me warmly. Receiving such a gracious welcome from such a striking woman only added to my nerves. Managing a smile, I replied, I'm Marty's sister, Joanna. After the introductions, we decided to move to a nearby restaurant. Once seated, conversation flowed as we discussed various topics. Vanessa comes from a well-known family around here, and her father is apparently quite wealthy. Marty has told me about you. After your parents passed away, you've been like a parent to him. Parent-like, I wouldn't say. Don't be modest. You gave up high school for me and went to work. Wait, you didn't finish high school? Yeah, I started working right after middle school at a supermarket. It's been 15 years now. Just then, something felt off. Though Vanessa was nodding and making cute faces, it felt like she was looking down on me from behind her eyes. I initially dismissed it as my imagination, but then I caught her disdainful expression when Marty wasn't looking. That dress looks lovely on you, she complimented me, yet the way she appraised me from head to toe and snickered quietly confirmed my suspicions. She was definitely looking down on me. Next year, we're planning to get married, Marty announced somewhat sheepishly. Honestly, I wasn't overjoyed, but if this was Marty's decision, I had to support him. All I could manage was a broad smile as I congratulated them. As our meeting concluded, I had my doubts, but if they were happy, who was I to intervene? I chose to let it pass. Days flew by, and suddenly Marty's wedding day was upon us. As I prepared my outfit and gathered necessities, Vanessa's call interrupted me. I quickly returned it, concerned about the reason for her call. I'm busy too. Could you get to the point? Her abrupt greeting caught me off guard. I apologize for running late. It's my fault, I said sincerely. On the other end, Vanessa sighed audibly before delivering a surprising request. Could you, sister-in-law, please consider not attending the wedding tomorrow? What? I don't understand, I replied, taken aback. Vanessa, what do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. I don't think even Marty would want his sister, who works at a grocery store, to be there, she said with a condescending tone that made me keenly aware of being looked down upon. Her disdain was palpable, and she made no effort to disguise it. But I can't possibly miss my brother's wedding, I insisted firmly. Vanessa, that's not an option. As the bride, I decide what's possible. Please don't force me to repeat myself. It's also for Marty's sake, Vanessa countered, a statement that left me with little room to argue. The guest list for the wedding included Marty's coach and teammates, as well as influential figures from Vanessa's family's business circles, people often referred to as elites. I couldn't shake the feeling that my presence as a high school dropout might disrupt the ambience. Marty might reassure me, but I'm sure others won't feel the same. Perhaps following Vanessa's suggestion and not attending would be best. Fine, I won't come. Can I at least send a congratulatory message, even if it feels impersonal, over the phone? If I can't say it in person, then what's the point? Forget it, Vanessa, I said curtly, ending the call. Shocked, I stared at my phone, now silent in my hand. I wished I could have witnessed Marty's happiness firsthand. Shoving my packed bag into a corner of the room, I crawled into bed, deciding to sleep through the day. I had no energy for anything else, and I feared that if I let my emotions surface, tears would follow. I tried to force my eyes shut, but sleep eluded me until morning. When I finally checked my phone, I saw multiple missed calls from Marty, expected, given the circumstances. The family was supposed to leave for the wedding venue early that morning. Just then, another call from Marty came through. Hello, sis, where are you? He asked urgently. I'm on my way, Marty, I replied. I can't do it today, I added after a pause. I could feel the disappointment in his voice. Why? Marty asked softly. I hesitated, torn about revealing the truth. Before I could respond, Marty continued. Did Vanessa say something? Is that why? How did? Before I could inquire further, he cuts me off. Forget it, just come over now. We'll talk later. With that, he ends the call abruptly. Despite my initial decision not to attend, I hastily prepare and leave home, my mind troubled by concerns for Marty and Vanessa. Arriving at the venue, I hear raised voices even before entering the waiting room. Guided by the venue staff, I step inside to witness Marty, Vanessa, and her parents engaged in a heated argument. Surrounding them, bewildered relatives who were meant to be guests look on in confusion. What do you mean not inviting Joanna to the wedding? Marty's voice carries frustration. I can't have a supermarket worker as my sister-in-law. It's embarrassing, Vanessa retorts, her parents nodding in agreement beside her. It's disheartening to see them all aligned on this issue. Witnessing Marty's escalating anger, I see his frustration boiling over. What do you mean I should be embarrassed? Joanna has worked tirelessly her whole life to take care of me, he asserts passionately. Vanessa scoffs at his defense. Because of your sister, I might never marry. You know I should come first, right? That's right, Vanessa asserts confidently, as if it's self-evident. Absolutely, her parents chime in unison. Meanwhile, Marty looks ready to explode with rage. Marty, Vanessa, let's try to calm down. I interject hastily, attempting to diffuse the tension. But Vanessa suddenly notices my presence and snaps. Why are you here? People like you, who work at supermarkets, weren't invited. Leave now. Why does she have to say things like that? I thought, struggling to hold back tears in front of Vanessa. Just then, a voice broke through the murmurs of the crowd of onlookers. Wait a moment, I can't let that comment slide, declared the voice. Its owner pushed through the gathering and stood before us. Coach. It was Marty's team coach, who had arrived early for the ceremony and intervened upon hearing the disturbance. Judging someone by their occupation is unjust, he asserted firmly. Vanessa shot him a pained glance. Even she couldn't maintain her composure in front of the coach. Well, that may be, the coach remarked with a wry smile as he pulled a book from his bag. My initial sadness evaporated, replaced by a rush of embarrassment. Are you sure she's low level, even by your standards? He challenged. That's a bestseller. What does this have to do with anything? I exclaimed, recognizing the book in his hands. It was a novel I had written under the pseudonym Annie. Vanessa and her parents were left speechless. The coach held up the book, revealing my secret identity as its author. The novel traced back to a time before Marty's soccer career took off. When life settled down after our parents' passing, I turned to reading as a solace, often spending time at a library near my supermarket workplace. That library had a public computer corner where I first explored writing, fueled by my passion for books. On a whim, I entered a contest and won, leading to connections with a publishing house. Now, I'm a recognized author of several bestsellers and often featured in the media. I've never heard this story, Vanessa finally spoke after a moment of stunned silence. Marty interrupted sharply. I never mentioned it, but it's true, fixing a firm gaze on Vanessa. Marty's sincerity seemed to sway Vanessa. She turned to me, her demeanor shifting from skeptical to genuinely impressed. If you're such an accomplished person, that changes things. Please join us for the ceremony. Don't toy with me. I'm not marrying you, Marty declared firmly, causing Vanessa to bristle. What did you just say? She retorted, her anger palpable. The coach intervened, holding Vanessa back. We can't go on like everything's normal after the way you've treated my sister. Marty continued, his voice resolute. I'm sorry, but I can't go through with this, Vanessa. Amidst protests from Vanessa's parents and the relatives who had gathered for the wedding, Marty offered a heartfelt apology. This isn't happening, Vanessa's parents exclaimed, restrained by their own relatives. After some heated exchanges, it was decided that Vanessa's guests would leave. Vanessa herself continued to demand, you have to marry me, as they departed. In the dressing room afterward, it was just Marty and me. Mary slumped onto the sofa, looking utterly drained. Are you sure it was the right decision to call off the wedding? I couldn't resist asking, though I knew it might reopen old wounds. Marty let out a bitter laugh. Being the soccer player means your time in the spotlight is limited. I don't think a marriage with Vanessa, who's so focused on her career, would have lasted. His words made sense. Marty had a valid point. I can imagine how Vanessa, who belittled me for working at a supermarket, would treat you if you gave up soccer, I remarked, thinking aloud. Why didn't you mention that I'm a writer? I asked Marty, curious about his reasoning. Marty had kept my identity as a writer from Vanessa, and I sensed there was a deliberate reason behind his silence. When I brought it up, Marty simply smiled. I couldn't shake the feeling that Marty had seen through Vanessa's facade. Numerous discussions unfolded between our families, ultimately leading to the formal cancellation of the engagement. Vanessa and her parents vehemently resisted to the very end, but the intervention of other relatives prevailed. Despite the broken engagement, Marty continued to excel in his soccer career. In contrast, Venus's family endured public scrutiny after her outburst in the waiting room was splashed across the media. As for me, I'm contemplating transforming this ordeal into a novel while balancing my writing career with my job at the supermarket. I intend to keep supporting Marty just as we've always done.
Life in my early years was a silent movie, played within the confines of a home that felt more like a fortress. My family, bound by strict norms that bordered on the extreme, watched my every move, every word, and every breath I took. It was a life of muted colors, where expressions were guarded, and spontaneity was a distant dream. My grandmother, Eleanor, was the first crack in that rigid world. She saw the life I was living and decided it was no life for a child. With a determination that matched her compassion, she pulled me out of that house when I was 13 and introduced me to a world where love wasn't just a whispered word but an everyday reality. Under her care, I blossomed. I traded silence for soft laughter, restrictions for freedom, and fear for love. But the shadows of my early years lingered, shaping me into a shy, modest young woman, whose comfort zone was the small, safe world I had built around myself. Web design became my chosen path, a career that allowed me to weave my creativity into the fabric of the digital world while staying within the protective walls of my home. My laptop was my window to the world, a world where I could be bold in my designs yet safeguarded from the direct gaze of society. On my 30th birthday, Grandma Eleanor decided it was time for me to meet someone, a thought that both thrilled and terrified me. Through her network, she found Ethan, a man just a few years my senior, known for his charm and seemingly gentle nature. Our first meeting was at a local diner, a place where the aroma of coffee and the buzz of quiet conversations created a comforting backdrop. Ethan walked in, his presence like a new chapter waiting to be written. "Lily, right? Your grandma's told me so much about you. Heard you're quite the artist with your web designs," Ethan said, his voice smooth, his smile easy. A blush crept up my cheeks, unaccustomed to such direct praise. "Thank you, Ethan. That's kind of you to say. And yes, design is my passion." As we talked, a connection began to form, gentle and tentative, like the first rays of sun after a long night. Ethan's words were like a balm, soothing the years of conditioned caution and reserve. "Lily, there's something about you. Your modesty, it's refreshing in this loud world. It's like discovering a quiet cove in a stormy sea," he said, his gaze holding mine with an intensity that stirred something deep within me. His words, so full of promise and understanding, touched a part of me that I had kept hidden, locked away from the world. "You know, Lily, I've always believed that true strength lies in being yourself, in a world that tries to make you like everyone else. I see that strength in you," Ethan continued, his voice sincere and warm. The days following that first meeting with Ethan were like stepping into a new world, one where the colors were brighter, and life felt more vivid. Our encounters were simple but meaningful, centered around long conversations over coffee, walks in the park, and shared laughter that seemed to echo long after we parted. One brisk afternoon, as we strolled through the park with leaves crunching under our feet, Ethan turned to me, his eyes shining with an idea. "Lily, you ever been to the old Wilson's farm? They've got this apple orchard, look straight out at a postcard in the fall." I shook my head, a smile spreading across my face. "Can't say I have, Ethan. My adventures have been pretty limited to the digital world, you know?" He chuckled, a sound that warmed me from the inside out. "Well, guess it's about time we change that. What'd you say about going there this Saturday? They say there's nothing like picking apples on a crisp fall morning." And just like that, our quiet, comfortable routine expanded to include these little adventures. Each moment with Ethan felt like a step away from my old life, a life of restrictions and silence, into something more vibrant, more alive. The days turned into weeks, and the connection between us grew stronger, more profound. It wasn't just about shared interests or mutual attraction, it was about understanding, about finding someone who saw me for who I was and cherished that. One cool evening, As we sat on a bench watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan's voice broke the comfortable silence between us. "Lily, I've gotta tell you, these past weeks with you, they've been something else. You've got this quiet strength, this grace about you. It's rare, and it's beautiful," he said, his words wrapping around me like a warm blanket. His compliment caught me off guard, and I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. "Thank you, Ethan. I don't know what to say. You make it easy to be myself, to open up." He took my hand in his touch gentle yet firm. "That's all I ask, Lily. For you to be yourself. Because who you are is pretty amazing. I was thinking, maybe, just maybe, we can turn us into something more, something lasting." His words hung in the air, a question and a promise all at once. I looked into his eyes, seeing not just the man I had come to know and care for, but a future, a possibility of a life filled with laughter, understanding, and love. "I'd like that, Ethan. More than you know," I replied, my heart feeling lighter, more hopeful than it had in years. Life took a sharp turn when I moved in with Ethan and his mother, Mrs. Clayton. The house, which I had imagined would be a sanctuary of love and warmth, quickly revealed itself as a battleground of expectations and criticism. It was on the first morning in my new home that Mrs. Clayton laid down the law. I was in the kitchen, trying to make a good impression by preparing breakfast, when she walked in, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. "Lily, let's get one thing straight. You're part of this family now, and in this house, we have rules. You're gonna take care of the cooking and the cleaning. Got it?" Her voice was sharp, leaving no room for protest. Taken aback, I could only nod. "Yes, Mrs. Clayton. I understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes narrowed as she inspected the kitchen. "And I expect things to be done right. I run a tight ship here. No slacking." With that, she left the room, leaving me to absorb the reality of my new life. Each day became a relentless cycle of household chores. I'd wake up early, cook breakfast, then clean, then work on my web design projects, and then cook again. It was as if my entire existence had been reduced to serving the needs of the house. Ethan, whom I had thought to be my partner and protector, seemed oblivious to the strain I was under. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I decided to voice my concerns. "Ethan, I need to talk to you about something," I started, my hands nervously twisting the dish towel. He looked up from his laptop, his expression one of mild annoyance. "What's up, Lily?" "It's about your mom, and the housework. It's a lot. And I feel like it's all on me," I said, the words spilling out in a rush. Ethan's eyes went back to his screen as he shrugged. "Well, yeah. Mom's set in her ways. It's just how things are done here. You'll get used to it. But, Ethan, it's not fair. It's not right. I'm working too, and I have my own life. I'm not just here to cook and clean," I protested, feeling a spark of defiance ignite within me. Ethan sighed, a sound of exasperation. "Lily, don't make a big deal out of this. Mom's the boss of the house. Just try to keep her happy, okay?" His words felt like a slap, a stark reminder that my feelings, my exhaustion, were of little consequence in this household. The web of control in the Clayton household tightened its grip around me as the days passed. It wasn't just about the cooking and cleaning anymore. My modest earnings from web design, which I had cherished as my own, became the next target in the Clayton family's playbook of dominance. It was a typical evening. I was sitting at the dining table, finalizing a project on my laptop, when Ethan and Mrs. Clayton cornered me with a conversation I wasn't prepared for. "Lily, we need to talk about your work," Ethan started, his tone serious. I looked up, puzzled. "My work? What about it?" Mrs. Clayton interjected, her voice sharp and commanding. "Your money, dear. It's time you start contributing to the household. You live here, after all. I felt a knot form in my stomach. But I do contribute, Mrs. Clayton. I take care of the house, the meals. Ethan cut me off. That's not enough, Lily. We're talking about financial contribution. Your earnings should be going into the family account. It's only fair. The unfairness of it all hit me like a wave. But that's my money, Ethan. I earn it. I have my own expenses, my own needs. Mrs. Clayton scoffed. Needs? What needs could you possibly have that are more important than this family? No, dear, your place is to support this household, just like we support you. Ethan nodded in agreement, his eyes void of the understanding and warmth they once held. It's decided then. From now on, your earnings go to the family account. I'll take care of the finances. I felt cornered, trapped. The little financial independence I had was being stripped away, leaving me more vulnerable than ever. But Ethan, this isn't right. It's not fair. I should have a say in how my money is used. He shrugged, a cold, dismissive gesture that sent shivers down my spine. Fair? Life's not fair, Lily. You're part of this family now, and this is how things work here. Mrs. Clayton's eyes bore into me, ensuring her message was loud and clear. You'll thank us later, dear. We're teaching you how to be part of a family, how to be a proper wife. As they left me there, alone with my racing thoughts, the reality of my situation became painfully clear. My income, my hard-earned money, was now under their control. Trapped in the Clayton household, my life had become a never-ending cycle of servitude. The financial control Ethan and his mother exerted over me was suffocating. My earnings, once a source of independence, were now tightly gripped in their hands. The situation was unbearable, yet I felt powerless to change it. One day, I decided to seek solace in the one place I always felt understood, the web design forum. Typing away on my laptop, I poured my heart out to Sarah, a fellow designer I had befriended online. Sarah, I'm in a bad place. Ethan and his mom, they're controlling everything, even my earnings. I don't know what to do, I typed, the words on the screen blurring through my tears. Almost instantly, Sarah's reply popped up. Lily, that's not right. They're manipulating you. That's financial abuse, you know. Her words were a jolt of reality. Abuse? I typed back, the word feeling foreign yet painfully accurate. Yes, abuse. Lily, you need to protect yourself. Read up on psychological abuse and financial control. Knowledge is power, Sarah urged. Taking her advice to heart, I started reading. Books on psychology, articles on financial abuse, stories of people who had walked the path I was on. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. Ethan and Mrs. Clayton weren't just overbearing, they were abusers, using manipulation and control to keep me under their thumb. One evening, as I was absorbed in a book on psychological growth, Mrs. Clayton barged into my room, her eyes scanning the title in my hands. What's this nonsense you're reading, Lily? She demanded, her voice dripping with disdain. It's a book on personal growth, Mrs. Clayton, I replied, a newfound strength in my voice. She snorted, personal growth? Don't fill your head with such rubbish. Your place is here, taking care of this family, not reading silly books. But her words, which would have once sent me into a spiral of self-doubt, now bounced off me. I had begun to see through their game, to understand the dynamics of control and abuse. Ethan, your mother thinks my reading is rubbish, I said later that evening, hoping to find an ally in him. Ethan, however, was far from supportive. Mom's right, Lily. You're getting ideas above your station. Focus on your duties here. That's what's important. His words were a crushing blow, yet they only fueled my determination. It was clear now, I was alone in this fight. But I was no longer the timid, compliant Lily they thought they knew. The knowledge I had armed myself with was my weapon, and I was ready to use it. Life at the Claytons had pushed me to my limits. I had been enduring, silently suffering under the weight of their control and manipulation. But everything changed the day fate intervened in the most unexpected way. It was a regular morning, and I was out running errands, lost in my thoughts, when suddenly, out of nowhere, a car came speeding around the corner. Before I could react, everything went black. I woke up in a sterile hospital room, my body aching and my mind foggy. As my vision cleared, I saw Ethan and Mrs. Clayton standing by my bedside. But their expressions weren't of concern or worry, they were of irritation and anger. "Lily, what were you thinking, wandering around like that? Do you have any idea how inconvenient this is for us?" Ethan's voice was harsh, void of any warmth. Mrs. Clayton chimed in, her words sharp and cold. "Yes, and now who's going to take care of the house, the cooking, the cleaning? You've put us in quite a bind, Lily." I lay there, stunned, not by the pain from my injuries, but by the sheer lack of empathy from the people I had been living with. I'm sorry," I managed to whisper, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Ethan's face twisted into a scowl. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Lily. We need you back on your feet, taking care of your responsibilities. This little stunt of yours is unacceptable." Mrs. Clayton nodded in agreement, her eyes scanning me with disdain. "Absolutely. And once you're back, we expect you to make up for the lost time. No slacking." Their words, their complete disregard for my well-being, lit a fire within me. It was the turning point, the moment I realized that I was nothing more than a convenience to them, a tool to be used and discarded at will. "Enough," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'm not your maid, not your cook, not your ATM. I'm a human being, and I deserve respect, care, and empathy, none of which you've shown." Ethan's eyes widened in shock, clearly not expecting resistance. "Lily, you're not thinking straight. You need to calm down and think about your duties, your place in this family." But I was done. Done with being told my place, done with being treated like a nobody. "My place," I said, my voice steady, "is not here, not with you. I deserve better, and I will have better." The doctor walked in at that moment, breaking the tension. He explained my injuries, the fractures, and the long road to recovery. Ethan and Mrs. Clayton's faces fell as they realized the implications, the weeks of convalescence, the medical expenses, and the absence of their obedient housekeeper. Ethan, his voice laced with frustration, turned to me. "If you think you're going to sit back and enjoy a vacation at our expense, you're mistaken. If you're not back on your feet and fulfilling your duties in a month, consider this marriage over." For the first time, his threat didn't scare me, it liberated me. "Ethan," I said, a smile tugging at the corners of my bruised lips, "I'm ready for that divorce. It's the best news I've heard in months." Their shocked faces were the last things I saw before they stormed out of the room. Lying in that hospital bed, I realized the crash hadn't just broken my bones, it had shattered the chains that bound me. A couple of days after Ethan and Mrs. Clayton's disastrous visit, a nurse wheeled in a small cart with my personal belongings, a bag that Ethan had left for me. Among the items was my laptop, my gateway to the world and, more importantly, to my independence. As I slowly, painfully opened the laptop, the screen welcomed me like an old friend. I was about to embark on the most crucial project of my life, my liberation. I began by drafting an email to my lawyer, detailing the years of financial control, emotional manipulation, and the recent threats from Ethan and his mother. My fingers trembled, but with each word typed, I felt stronger, more in control. A few days later, Ethan came to visit, his demeanor a mix of anger and disbelief. "Lily, what's this nonsense about a lawyer? You think you can take me on?" he scoffed, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. I looked at him, my resolve unwavering. "It's not nonsense, Ethan. It's the truth. I'm done being your puppet. I'm taking back my life, my money, my dignity." He laughed, a cold, harsh sound. You? You don't have the guts. You're nothing without me, without us." But I wasn't the old Lily anymore. "Watch me, Ethan. You and your mother have controlled and used me for long enough. Those days are over." His face reddened, a vein throbbing in his neck. "You'll regret this, Lily. You'll come crawling back." I shook my head, a small smile playing on my lips. "I'd rather crawl through fire than come back to you." After Ethan stormed out, the days blended into weeks. My body was healing, but more importantly, my spirit was healing too. I spent hours reading, learning, and preparing for the battle ahead. The hospital room, once a symbol of my vulnerability, had become my war room. The day I was discharged from the hospital marked the beginning of my new life. Grandma Eleanor, frail but with a spirit as strong as ever, was by my side as I walked out of the hospital. Her eyes, filled with tears of pride and relief, told me all I needed to know. I was on the right path. "Grandma, I'm scared, but I'm ready," I told her, my voice steady. She squeezed my hand. "I know, my dear. And you're not alone. We're in this together." The journey back to Grandma Eleanor's house was quiet, but it was a silence filled with determination and hope. The old Lily was gone, and in her place stood a woman ready to reclaim her life, one step at a time. The morning of the hearing, Grandma Eleanor and I sat at the kitchen table, a silent understanding between us. "Lily, you ready for this?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. I nodded, feeling a surge of strength from her unwavering support. "I am, Grandma. It's time to put an end to this, once and for all." At the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. Ethan and Mrs. Clayton were already there, their faces a mask of arrogance and disbelief. They still couldn't fathom that the once submissive Lily was challenging them. As we walked past them, Ethan's voice, cold and mocking, reached my ears. "You really think you can win this, Lily? You're just a nobody." I stopped, turning to face him, my gaze unflinching. "I am somebody, Ethan. And today, you'll see just how much you underestimated me." The court proceedings were a blur, with testimonies given and evidence presented. My lawyer was a pillar of strength, laying out the years of financial and emotional abuse with precision and clarity. Ethan and Mrs. Clayton's lawyer tried to discredit me, painting me as an ungrateful wife. But the recordings I had made, the meticulous records of their controlling behavior, and the financial statements spoke louder than their lies. As the judge pronounced the verdict, favoring me and granting significant compensation, the look of shock and defeat on Ethan and Mrs. Clayton's faces was a sight I would never forget. Outside the courthouse, Ethan approached, his demeanor now that of a defeated man. "Lily, please, let's talk about this. We can settle it without the compensation. You don't have to do this." I looked at him, the man I once believed would protect me, now a mere shadow of his former self. "No, Ethan. You had your chance. You chose to control and abuse instead of love and respect. This is the consequence of your actions." Mrs. Clayton, her pride shattered, joined in, her voice trembling. "Lily, please, I'm an old woman. Have some mercy." I shook my head, the final pieces of the emotional shackles they had bound me with falling away. "Mercy was what I begged for when you controlled every aspect of my life, Mrs. Clayton. It's too late for that now." As Grandma Eleanor and I walked away, the weight of years of oppression lifting off my shoulders, I knew that this was more than just a legal victory. It was the triumph of justice, the affirmation of my strength, and the beginning of a new chapter. But the story didn't end there. News of Ethan's and Mrs. Clayton's actions spread, reaching Ethan's workplace. His colleagues started looking at him differently, whispers followed him around, and soon, his position at work was demoted. He was a shadow of his former self, condemned and despised for his actions. Mrs. Clayton faced her own downfall. She found herself ostracized, her name synonymous with manipulation and cruelty. Decent society closed its doors on her, her past actions casting a long shadow over her present. As for me, life was opening new doors. It was a chance to start fresh, to build a life on my terms. The battle was tough, but it led to a new beginning, a future where I was no longer a victim, but the author of my own story. The final reckoning was not just an end, but a promise of a new, brighter dawn. My name is Camila. I was a fresh college graduate, my life brimming with possibilities and dreams, when a single phone call snuffed out my joy like a gust of wind extinguishing a candle. It was a call that brought the news of my parents' tragic death in a car accident. The two people who had been my pillars of strength, my guiding lights, were suddenly gone. The shock of it was like a punch to the gut. I was a grown woman, yes, but I was just starting to navigate the adult world. My parents had been my safety net, my guides. Their sudden absence left me feeling like a ship adrift in a stormy sea. My father, with his hearty laughter and endless wisdom, was my hero. He was a man of strength and kindness, always ready with a word of advice or a comforting hug. I remember our long walks in the park, our deep conversations about everything from philosophy to the latest football game. He was my rock, my safe harbor in the stormy sea of life. My mother, with her gentle nature and unwavering support, was my best friend. She was the one who held my hand during scary movies, who stayed up late helping me with school projects, who was always there with a comforting word and a warm hug. Her love was a constant, soothing presence in my life. Their absence left a gaping hole in my life, a void that seemed impossible to fill. The house felt too quiet, too empty without their laughter and love filling it. Every corner was a reminder of them, every object a memory. In the midst of my grief, a man named Richard appeared. He was a worker at a trading company who happened to be at the scene of the accident. He had provided a witness statement, and he felt compelled to reach out to me, to offer his support. "Camila," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "I can't express how sorry I am for your loss. I saw what happened. It's not fair, and it's not right. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." His words, though simple, were a lifeline in the storm of my grief. Richard became a steady presence in my life, helping me navigate the legalities of the accident, the insurance claims, the mountain of paperwork that seemed to multiply every day. His support was invaluable, his kindness a balm for my aching heart. As the weeks turned into months, Richard and I grew closer. Our conversations grew longer, our silences more comfortable. One day, he took a deep breath, looked me in the eye, and said, "Camila, I've come to care about you a lot. More than I've cared about anyone else. Would you consider marrying me?" I was taken aback, but I looked into his eyes, and saw the sincerity there. I thought about the comfort he had provided, the strength he had shown. And I said yes. I said yes to a new beginning, yes to a new chapter in my life. The wedding was a blur of joy and laughter, a day filled with hope and promise. After the celebrations, Richard and I moved into his house that was as grand as it was cold. The house was a testament to Richard's success, a symbol of the wealth he had amassed in his trading business. I was awestruck by its grandeur, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that crept over me each time I stepped into its marble halls. Soon after the move, I discovered I was pregnant. The news filled me with a sense of joy and anticipation. I dreamed of our child, of the life we would provide for him. Richard seemed pleased as well, but there was a hardness in his eyes that I couldn't quite understand. Our son, Max, was born on a clear winter morning. He was a beautiful baby, with Richard's dark hair and my bright blue eyes. Holding him in my arms, I felt a love so profound, so overwhelming, it took my breath away. Richard, too, seemed smitten with our son. But as the weeks turned into months, I noticed a change in him. One day, Richard came home late from work, his face set in a grim line. "Camila," he said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth, "we need to talk about our expenses." I was taken aback. "What about them?" I asked, feeling a knot of worry form in my stomach. He threw a stack of bills on the table, his expression stern. "They've gone up, Camila," he said, his voice cold. "Ever since Max was born, we're spending much more than we used to." I felt my heart sink. "But Richard," I said, "we have a baby now. Babies need things." He shot me a hard look. "That's not the point, Camila," he said. "You're spending too much. On things we don't need." I was stunned. "I'm spending on our son, Richard," I said, my voice rising in defense. "On his needs." His face hardened. "I'm the one who's earning, Camila," he said, his voice harsh. "I'm the one who's supporting this family. You should be more grateful." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. I felt a mixture of anger and hurt well up inside me. I had thought Richard was my partner, my ally. But his words made it clear that he saw me as a liability, an additional expense that he had to bear. The days following our heated exchange were filled with tension. Richard became more stringent about our budget, scrutinizing every receipt, every purchase. He was relentless in his accusations of my alleged overspending, despite my best efforts to economize. "Camila," he'd say, his voice dripping with condescension, "you need to understand the value of money." "Richard, we need food," I'd say. "And Max needs diapers. We can't just stop buying them." He'd look at me, his eyes hard and cold. "Then figure it out, Camila. Make do with less." I'd bite my tongue, holding back the retort that was on the tip of it. It wasn't that I didn't understand the value of money, it was that Richard seemed to value it more than he did his own family. Food shopping became a game of strategy. I'd scour the aisles for the cheapest products, calculate the cost per meal, per person. I'd choose the store brands over the name brands, the bruised apples over the pristine ones. I'd walk miles to the store and back, foregoing the cost of public transport to save a few dollars. Richard's decree extended to clothing as well. "No new clothes," he'd said, his voice firm, unyielding. "Make do with what you have." I looked at my worn-out wardrobe, the frayed edges of my dresses, the faded colors of my shirts. I felt a pang of sadness. I wasn't asking for designer clothes or expensive jewelry. Just something new, something that hadn't been worn to threads. One day, I saw a beautiful little jumper for Max in a store window. It was on sale, but even then, it was more than I could afford. I walked away, my heart heavy. When I got home, Richard was there. "You were at the store, weren't you? Buying more stuff we don't need." "I didn't buy anything, Richard," I said, my voice steady. "I can't." "You've made sure of that." He scoffed. "Don't play the victim, Camila. You're the one who can't control her spending." I looked at him, my heart pounding. "I'm trying to provide for our son, Richard. Can't you see that?" He got up, his face red. "I'm the one providing for this family, Camila. You're just spending my money." I felt a surge of anger. "Your money? Richard, we're a family. It's our money." He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Oh, Camila. You're so naive." I stood my ground, my hands clenched. "No, Richard. I'm not naive. I'm just trying to do what's best for our son." He glared at me. "And I'm trying to save us from bankruptcy. But you wouldn't understand that, would you?" With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there, my heart aching. All the while, I noticed Richard's lifestyle remained unchanged. He still wore his designer suits, still splurged on expensive gadgets. He'd come home with a new phone, a new laptop, a new watch, while I was left to mend old clothes and ration our meals. Richard, I'd say, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice, how come you get to buy new things, but I can't? He'd look at me, a smug smile on his face. Because I earn the money, Camila. I get to decide how it's spent. His words stung, a slap in the face. I was his wife, the mother of his child, but he treated me like a burden, like an unwanted expense. His greed was clear, his arrogance palpable. He valued his gadgets more than he valued us. It was a Tuesday when Max came down with a fever. His little body was hot to the touch, his eyes were red from crying. I knew I had to get him medicine, and quick. I rummaged through the cupboards, my heart sinking when I saw them bare. We were out of money, out of options. I did the only thing I could. I took the last of our cash, the money I'd been saving for Richard's favorite steak, and bought medicine for Max. I knew Richard would be mad, knew he'd be furious. But Max was more important. He was my son, my baby. I couldn't let him suffer. When Richard came home that night, he was in a foul mood. He'd had a long day at work, he said, and all he wanted was a good meal. When he saw the empty table, his face turned red. Camila, he said, his voice low and dangerous, where's my dinner? I swallowed hard. Max was sick, I said. I used the money to buy him medicine. Richard's eyes narrowed. You what? I bought medicine for Max, I repeated, my voice steady despite the fear in my heart. Richard slammed his fist on the table. You spent my money on medicine for that brat? I flinched at his words. Max is our son, Richard. He was sick. Richard scoffed. He's always sick. Always needing something. Just like you. I felt a surge of anger. We're your family, Richard. We're not freeloaders. Richard stood up, his face contorted with rage. You're nothing but a burden, Camila. You and that kid. All you do is take. I stood my ground. We're your responsibility, Richard. You can't just abandon us. Richard laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. Watch me. And with that, he grabbed my arm, yanked me to the door. Get out, he said, his voice cold. Take your brat and get out. I looked at him, my heart pounding. Richard, please. He's sick. We have nowhere to go. Richard's gaze was icy. Not my problem. He shoved us out the door, slamming it shut behind us. 5 minutes later, he threw a bag of our clothes at my feet. I stood there, holding Max in my arms, the cold seeping into my bones. I looked at the house, our house, now a fortress we were barred from. That was the final straw. I knew then that I couldn't stay with Richard, couldn't subject Max to his cruelty. We deserved better, deserved a life free of his anger, his greed. So, I walked away, Max clutched in my arms, our future uncertain. But I knew one thing for sure. I would fight for us, fight for a better life. Richard had pushed us away, but he couldn't break us. We were stronger than he thought, stronger than he'd ever know. The city was vast and overwhelming, a concrete jungle where I knew no one. My son, Max, was just a toddler, too young to understand the dire situation we were in. With no money, no friends, and no home, I felt like a ship adrift in a stormy sea. That's when I remembered Grandma. My father's mother, a woman I had seen only once in my life, came to mind. Dad had a strained relationship with her and they had lost contact many years ago. I barely remembered her face, but I remembered the house she lived in, a large, old structure nestled in a quiet town far from the city's bustle. I had no choice but to take a leap of faith. With the last of my money, found in the pocket of my old jacket, I bought 2 intercity bus tickets. Max and I boarded the bus, our future uncertain but our resolve firm. The journey was long, and Max, feeling unwell, whimpered in my arms. I held him close, whispering soothing words, promising a better future. We arrived at Grandma's town as the sun was setting. The large, old house stood just as I remembered, a beacon of hope amidst our turmoil. Gathering my courage, I walked up to the door and knocked. The door creaked open, and there stood Grandma. She was older than I remembered, her face stern and her eyes sharp. She looked at me, a hint of confusion in her eyes. "Yes?" she asked, her voice firm. I swallowed my fear and introduced myself. "Grandma, it's me, Camila. I'm your son's daughter." She squinted at me, studying my face. After a moment, recognition dawned on her. "You have your father's eyes," she said, her voice softer. She opened the door wider, inviting us in. We stepped into the house, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold outside. I told Grandma everything about Richard, about Max's illness, about our eviction. I poured out my fears and worries, the burdens I had been carrying alone for so long. Grandma listened, her face hardening as I mentioned Richard. "That scoundrel," she spat, her eyes flashing with anger. "He'll get what he deserves." In that moment, I felt a surge of relief. Here was someone who believed in me, someone who was on my side. Grandma offered us a place to stay, a place to call home. We were no longer alone, we had Grandma. That night, as Max slept soundly in a warm bed and I sat by the fire with Grandma, I felt a glimmer of hope. The journey to Grandma's was fraught with uncertainty and fear, but it led us to a safe haven. It was our first step towards a new life, a life away from Richard's shadow. The attic was a dusty, forgotten place, filled with boxes upon boxes of old stuff. Grandma hadn't been up there in years, and it showed. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and mothballs, and the floor creaked under my weight. "Be careful, Camila," Grandma called from the bottom of the stairs. "It's been ages since anyone's been up there." I nodded, my eyes scanning the room. As a person trained as a restorer, I could see the potential in the discarded items. There were old furniture pieces, paintings, knickknacks, all covered in a thick layer of dust. It was like stepping into a time capsule, a glimpse into the past. With Grandma's permission, I started working on the items. I cleaned, repaired, and restored them, bringing them back to life. Each piece had a story to tell, a history to uncover. It was a labor of love, a way to keep my mind off the troubles of the past. Days turned into weeks, and before I knew it, the attic was transformed. The old, discarded items were now beautiful antiques, their value increased tenfold. I took some of them to a local antique store, hoping to make a small profit. The owner, a man named Mr. Peterson, was surprised by the quality of the items. "These are fantastic, Camila," he said, his eyes wide. "Where did you find them?" "In my grandma's attic," I replied, a smile playing on my lips. She had no idea what she was sitting on. Mr. Peterson laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. "Well, she's a lucky woman to have a granddaughter like you." I blushed, thanking him for his kind words. He bought all the items, giving me a hefty sum of money. I was stunned. I had hoped for a small profit, but this was beyond my wildest dreams. When I returned home, Grandma was waiting for me. "How did it go?" she asked, her eyes hopeful. I showed her the money, her eyes widening in surprise. "Oh my, Camila," she said, her voice shaky. "I can't believe it." I shrugged, trying to hide my excitement. "It's all thanks to you, Grandma. These are your treasures, after all." We celebrated that night, a small victory in our battle for a better life. The attic treasures were more than just old items. They were a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a glimmer of hope. From then on, I continued to restore the items in the attic. Each piece brought us closer to our goal, each sale a step towards our new life. The attic treasures were our lifeline, our saving grace. And we were grateful for them, for the hope they brought us, for the future they promised. Richard, that good-for-nothing, hadn't bothered to check on us. Not even a call to ask about his son. I guess he was too busy with his new life, too busy to care about the family he left behind. But we weren't going to let him off the hook that easily. Grandma had a friend, a lawyer named Stan. He was a tough old bird, sharp as a tack, and he didn't take any nonsense. "We'll get that bastard," he promised, his eyes hard. "He won't get away with this." With Stan's help, we filed a claim for child support. Richard was furious when he found out. He called me, his voice a venomous hiss. "You'll regret this, Camila," he threatened. "You don't know what you're getting into." But I wasn't scared. Not anymore. "Bring it on, Richard," I shot back. "We'll see who regrets it in the end." The day of the court hearing arrived. Richard strutted in, all puffed up like a peacock, his lawyer by his side. He sneered at me, his eyes cold and hard. But I didn't flinch. I was ready for him. Stan presented our case, his voice steady and firm. He talked about Max, about how Richard had abandoned us, about how he hadn't paid a dime for his son's upkeep. The judge listened, his face impassive. Then it was Richard's turn. His lawyer was smooth, his words slick. He painted Richard as the victim, as a man wronged by his vindictive ex-wife. But we had a trump card. I played a recording of Richard's tirade the night he kicked us out. He didn't know about it, and I decided to surprise him. His threats, his cruel words, all for the court to hear. The room fell silent as his voice filled the air, his true nature exposed for all to see. Richard's face turned pale, his confident facade crumbling. The judge frowned, his eyes hard. "This court will not tolerate such behavior," he said, his voice stern. "Mr. Jackson, you will pay child support as required by law. You also have to pay for the emotional abuse of your ex-wife and son." Richard was stunned. He looked at me, his eyes full of disbelief. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The look on his face was victory enough. After the court hearing, Richard tried to worm his way back into our lives. He called me, his voice all sweet and smooth, like honey dripping from a spoon. "Camila," he said, "let's start over. For Max's sake." I laughed, a bitter, cynical laugh. "Start over? With you?" I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "No, Richard. We're done." I could hear the surprise in his voice. "But Camila," he stammered, "you need me. You can't survive without my money." That's where he was wrong. I had a job now, a good job. I was a restorer, working for a local antique store and a museum. I was making good money, enough to support Max and me. And with Grandma's help, we were doing just fine. "I don't need you, Richard," I said, my voice steady. "I've got a job. A good job. And Max and I are doing just fine." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Richard laughed, a harsh, bitter laugh. "You? Working? I don't believe it." "Well, you better start believing it," I shot back. "Because it's true. And guess what, Richard? I'm not just surviving. I'm thriving." There was more silence. Then Richard hung up, his parting words a venomous hiss. "You'll regret this, Camila. You'll see." But I wasn't scared. Not anymore. I had found my strength, my independence. And there was no going back. The next few months were a whirlwind. I was busy with work, with Max, with life. But I was happy. Truly, genuinely happy. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from Richard, free from fear, free from uncertainty. Grandma was proud of me. "You did good, kid," she said one day, her eyes twinkling. You stood up for yourself. You took control of your life. I smiled, feeling a sense of pride. Thanks, Grandma, I said. I couldn't have done it without you. And that was the truth. Grandma had been my rock, my support. She had stood by me, had helped me find my strength. And for that, I was grateful. The sweet taste of victory was more than just a court win. It was a personal victory, a testament to my strength, my resilience. It was a reminder that I was more than just Richard's ex-wife. I was a survivor, a fighter, a mother, a restorer. And as I looked at Max, his eyes bright with laughter, his face full of joy, I knew I had made the right choice. I had chosen to fight, to stand up for myself, for my son. And I had won. Hey, my name's Margot. Last year, I changed my status to Mrs. and added a wedding band next to my collection of courtroom victories. Slinging arguments before a judge, that's my zone. But dang, I never thought I'd need a defense strategy for family dinners. So, let me put you in the picture. My man, Tom, he's a mama's boy, and I get why. Mrs. Walters, his mom, is the queen bee of their hive. Did the single mom hustle, brought up 2 kids solo. Mad props for that. Sarah, his sister, well, she's another story, thinks she's the center of the universe or something. I remember walking into their place for the first time, Tom's arm around me like he's showing off a trophy. The living room's like a shrine, photos of Tom and Sarah plastered on every surface. It's cozy but feels like stepping onto a movie set where they've been playing house for years, and suddenly I'm the unexpected guest star. Mrs. Walters came at me with this tight-lipped smile. You know the kind, the one that says, I'm smiling because that's what I'm supposed to do, but I'd rather be scrubbing the bathroom grout with your toothbrush. Dressed in one of those floral numbers that just screamed I'm the matriarch. Margot, dear, Tom's told us so much about you, she said, sizing me up like I'm a car she's not sure she wants to buy. Yeah, I've been looking forward to meeting the famous Mrs. Walters. Tom's done nothing but sing your praises, I said, trying to thaw the room a bit. Oh, how sweet, Sarah chimed in. She'd been eyeing me like a hawk since I walked in. Tell us, Margot, how's the lawyer life? I picture you in court, like on TV, making bank. So how much do you actually make? I almost choked on my spit. Who asks that straight out of the gate? I laughed though, 'cause what else are you gonna do? You know, trade secret and all that. I shot back, not missing a beat. Mrs. Walters picked up the baton like it was a relay race. But surely you can give us a ballpark figure, for family. Tom shot me that please don't be mad look, but I kept my cool. If I had $1 for every time someone asked me that, I'd have enough to change the subject, I parried, topping it off with what I hoped was a disarming smile. Mrs. Walters snorted. Yeah, she snorted. Well, it's no secret what a teacher earns. Right, Tom? Mom, Tom sighed. Let's not do this now. Right, she said, waving her hand like she's dismissing a servant or something. Anyway, you'll be like family now, sharing is caring and all that. I slid a look at Tom. His help-me face was on full display. I knew then I wasn't just marrying Tom, I was enlisting in some low-key domestic Cold War. Couple weeks in, and I'm standing in our kitchen, apron on, pot simmering, trying out Mrs. Walters' famous chili recipe. Now, Mrs. Walters and Sarah have got this routine. They drop over unannounced like they forgot it ain't their house. Your chili needs more heat. Mrs. Walters picks at the ladle like she might catch something. And less salt. Watch your husband's blood pressure. Got it, I reply. Inside, I'm rolling my eyes so hard I'm seeing my brain. Sarah's there too, all leaned back on a stool like she's the Queen of Sheba. You see this spot, Margot? Cleanliness is next to godliness, isn't it, Mom? Mrs. Walters nods like it's gospel and Sarah's high-fiving herself in her head. Funny, I cleaned this place this morning, I say, swiping the spot off the counter. Must have missed that one. Tom's in the other room, clueless, probably deep in some video game or sports stats. So, I figure it's high time to fill him in on the home invasions. I poke my head in where he's slouched on the couch. Hey, you got a sec? What's up, babe? Tom flicks his eyes up for just a moment, poor thing, like he's afraid he might miss a crucial play. Your mom and Sarah, they come in, take over, nitpick everything I do. It's like they're looking for stuff to complain about. I let it tumble out. Ah, Margot, they mean well, you know? They're just... Tom scratches his head. I'll talk to them. They'll chill out. Back to the kitchen, and it's like walking into the final round of some cook-off where I'm the only contestant and the judges are out for blood. So, Margot, when's dinner? Tom must be starving. Sarah glances at me like I'm the help. Whenever the chili decides it's ready, I shoot back, but I keep my voice light. It's a tightrope walk. Dinner lands on the table, and I'm scanning their faces. Mrs. Walters stirs hers around, inspecting every bean like it holds the secret to the universe. Bit different from how I make it, Mrs. Walters finally says. That's code for nice try, but you're no match for me. Tom dives in though, bless him. Babe, this is awesome. Right, Mom? Sakai, Sarah mutters, and Mrs. Walters just shrugs like she's agreeing with the worst food critic. After they leave, Tom's slapping his belly, saying it's all good. I'm watching the door shut behind them, feeling tiny, like I'm losing at some game I didn't sign up to play. The next time they pop over, it's the same old tune, like nothing changed. I must have been dreaming to think a few words from Tom might turn the tide. Still, I ask him to talk to his mother about boundaries. I thought getting hitched was the hard part. Fitting into Tom's family? That's the real challenge. They've got their own idea of family, and I ain't in it, yet. If this is what married life is like, count me out of the honeymoon phase. It was one of those days where the clock seemed to tick slower than syrup drips from a bottle. That's when my phone decided to sing its little heart out. Glancing at the caller ID, my heart sank. It was Mrs. Walters. Again. Margot. Her voice was stern, and it did nothing for my headache. You think you can just snatch Tom away from us, huh? Her words stung like vinegar on a paper cut. I glanced over at Tom, hoping he'd at least flinch at his mother's tone. Nothing. He's glued to the TV screen, a statue with heartbeat. Mrs. Walters, it's not like that. We're just trying to set up some boundaries, I said, my voice squeezed thin. Boundaries? She fumed. That's just a fancy word for shutting us out. You can't do that to us, to me. He's my son. As I blinked back frustration, Tom's still silent, looking like someone shrunk his spine in the wash. Listen, it's normal for married folks to want their own space. I tried to keep the edge out of my tone. Space? He's never needed space before you, came her sharp retort. Her voice was a buzzsaw and each word carved up my patience. That was when Tom decided to pipe up, but not to back me up. No. Mom, is everything okay? Margot's not, she's not being unreasonable, I guess, he said, but his voice was like wet cardboard. Tom, I just can't believe this. First, Sarah tells me Margot is making a fuss over our visits, and now this? Mrs. Walters sounded wounded, and boy did Tom jump on that note. Sarah said that? Tom turned to me, eyebrows raised as if I was the one creating trouble. Yeah, she did. And I think she's right. Family is family, Tom. You can't just turn your back on us. She pressed harder, knowing she was reeling him in. I saw my husband, a man I loved, deflate like a party balloon 2 days after the fun. The call ended with promises of another family meeting that felt more like a summit to discuss the terms of my surrender. After the call, it was as if nothing happened. Tom settled back on the couch, resuming his championship in channel surfing. Mrs. Walters resumed her drive-bys, each one a masterclass in thinly veiled jabs. And Sarah? Well, she might as well have been a puppet master the way she got Tom's ear whenever she pleased. When word got back to me that my husband's sister, Sarah, was running her mouth about me all over town, my blood boiled for a second. But I didn't let it get the best of me. I knew I had to handle this the right way. So, I waited for the right moment to deal with Sarah directly, and that moment came sooner than I thought. I found Sarah at the market on a Saturday morning, filling her basket with groceries. She didn't see me at first, but I walked right up to her, steady and strong. "Sarah," I said. She looked up and rolled her eyes. "What do you want, Margot?" "We need to talk. It's about the stories you've been spreading." She snorted loudly, a smirk spreading across her face. "Stories? I don't know what you're talking about." "The rumors, Sarah. About me. Emily's bossy, Emily's this and that. Cut it out." She laughed, tossing an apple up and down in her hand. "And what are you going to do if I don't? You think you can boss me around?" I kept my cool. "Listen, spreading lies isn't just mean, it's slander. And I won't stand for it." Sarah laughed again, louder this time. "You're gonna sue me? Get real, Margot. You ain't got the stomach for that. People's reputations are at stake." "I'm serious, Sarah. Keep it up, and yes, I will take legal action if I need to." The arrogance just poured off her as she leaned in close. "You're in way over your head. Little Miss City Lawyer gonna take me to court? This isn't a joke, Sarah. I'm giving you a chance to stop this nonsense before it gets serious." She shoved her face closer to mine, a challenge plain in her expression. "Bring it on, Margot. Do your worst." With that, she spun on her heel, almost knocking over a display of canned beans, and left me standing there. Her laughter echoed through the aisle long after she was gone. I walked back home slower than usual, turning everything over in my mind. Later that day, when my husband came back from wherever he'd been, I told him what had happened. He was in the middle of taking his boots off and he froze, one boot off, the other still on. "You did what now?" I told Sarah off. I threatened her with legal action if she doesn't stop spreading rumors. His face went red, then white. "You couldn't just let it go? Why'd you have to stir the pot, Margot?" I straightened up. "Because it's not right, and I won't be walked over. Not by her, not by anyone." We were silent for a good long while after that, both of us lost in our thoughts. It was clear this was more than a little family squabble, it was a line drawn in the sand, and I had to stand my ground. "He's got nothin'." Just stands there with that same lost puppy look that's growing a permanent spot on his face. I tossed myself onto the couch, fuming. The gossip might calm down for now, but Sarah, she's the kinda weed that keeps sprouting up. No tellin' when she'll start her yap pen again. And Tom? God knows if he'll ever find the guts to stand up to them. Right now, though, I just need to cool off, figure out my next move in this messy game they're all too eager to play. The whole mess with Sarah had me weighing my options like a pros and cons list in my head. I mean, I signed up for a life with Tom, not a daily soap opera with his family. And with things going from bad to worse, the D word started rattling around in my brain like loose change in a dryer. Then, as if on cue, Mrs. Walters, the town's self-appointed gossip queen and Sarah's godmother, rings me up. "Margot, dear," she chirped like a bird that spotted a worm, "we're throwing a little shindig for Sarah's engagement. It's happening at Luigi's next week. We'd love to see you there." The tone of her voice was all fake nicety, the kind that practically screams "I dare you to show up." I'm staring at the silent phone after hanging up, thinking how this invite smells like a setup. Tom's already on edge, and now this? I couldn't help but blurt out to him, "Guess who's got plans for us next week?" He's sitting at the kitchen table, forehead creased like he's trying to iron it out with thought. Who's scheming now? "Your sister's engagement party," I say flat out. "We're invited, courtesy of Mrs. Walters." His face goes a shade paler, the crease deepening. "Oh, hell. Yeah. Oh, hell sounds about right. So, what's the play here, Tom? We gonna roll over and play nice, or what?" He's quiet for too long, and I'm not having it. "Come on, spit it out." Tom finally looks up, his eyes are all serious. Margot, it's family. I think we should go. I cross my arms, feeling the heat rise up my neck. And let Sarah have a field day? I'm not their punching bag. He throws his hands up, a little too dramatic if you ask me. What do you want me to say? That's my sister, Margot. I lean in, my own hands flat on the table. And I'm your wife. Or does that not count for much these days? The D word is right there on the tip of my tongue, but I bite it back hard. Tom runs his hand through his hair, making it stand up like he's just had an electric shock. Of course, it counts. Look, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place here. I'm a heartbeat away from losing my cool. Well, guess what, sweetheart? So am I. I married you, not your constant need to please your family at my expense. Tom stands up, walks over, and takes my hands. They felt like rough grip paper, all work and worry. Margot, I love you. I do. And I hate that it's got to this. Let's not go to the party. You and me, we're a team, right? It struck me then that this was the first time in a long while he'd picked me over them without flinching. It felt like finding an oasis in the middle of the desert. That night, the thought of divorce quietly tucked itself away, not gone, but sleeping, sort of like a dog with one eye always open. But it was enough for me to catch my breath, to maybe believe that we could find some solid ground again. Luigi's was hoppin' when we showed up, walls throbbing with too loud laughter and clinking glasses. I spot Mrs. Walters right off, sitting queen bee style at the biggest table with that I rule the world look. There's Tom's sister, Sarah, all grins like she's won the lottery, and her guy, Mark, a sort of deer-in-headlights type trying to smile. His folks are with them too, stiff and awkward like they wandered into the wrong movie theater. Mrs. Walters zeroes in on me the second we step in. Margot, she oozes, like I'm a 5-year-old who's not playing nice. You'll be taking care of the bill tonight, right? To show you're one of us. I just about spit out my drink. What? Why me? The table's all ears now, and the air's thick with that "oh, this is gonna be good" vibe. Mrs. Walters stretches her smile. Tradition, sweetheart. The newest family member always shows their commitment. My jaw clamps shut so fast I'm surprised I don't chip a tooth. Commitment? That sounds a whole lot like a shakedown. Everyone's perked up like hounds hearing a whistle, and there she goes, Mrs. Walters puffing up like I've slapped her. Excuse me? That's uncalled for. Tom leans in, his voice barely more than a spit of sound. Just do it, Margot. It's not a big deal. A big deal? I fire back, whisper turned to a snarl. No thanks. I ain't no one's piggy bank. He's hissing now, real quiet but clear. Pay the damn bill, Margot, or we're through. I mean it. My laugh's as sharp as a snapped wire. You're not serious? He's all stone face and tight mouth. You think I'm playing? I stare him down. Divorce over this? He's all, family first, Margot. I'm shaking my head, and where do I fit, huh? It's showdown time, and even Mark and his parents are watching, their faces screaming what the hell's going on? I push back my chair and stand, let them all get an earful. No, I ain't doing this dance, I say, voice like a hammer on steel. There's shock on their faces, some whispering, some wide-eyed. Tom's going red, white, red, like a stoplight losing its mind. Mrs. Walters looks like she might choke. I walk out into the night. It's black and cool and smells like freedom. I hear the door slam behind me, my heart's doing a 100-yard dash, but it's Tom who flung the D word, not me. The bar was nothing special, just another hole in the wall with dim lights and the smell of old beer. I had barely settled with a glass of something strong when my phone rang. It was Tom, and for a moment, I considered not answering. But I did. Margot, listen, I'm sorry. I didn't want to say divorce. Tom's voice was rushed, apologetic. Before I could even think of a response, Sarah's voice blasted through. You've ruined my engagement dinner, you selfish. The phone must have changed hands so fast my head spun. I could practically hear the venom in her voice. In the background, I heard Mrs. Walters, loud and clear. "Why should I pay? He's your son, you pay the bill. I won't have my daughter married into a family that doesn't know how to treat." The chaos from Luigi's was spilling through the phone like a bad sitcom without a laugh track. People were arguing, and it seemed like nobody was keen on picking up the tab. I pushed away from the bar, my anger lending me a clear, calm voice. "Sarah, chill out. Your mom's the one making a scene, not me." "Hang up, Margot," Tom said, now a faint whisper behind his sister's ranting. "No, she needs to." Sarah kept going, but I wasn't about to play this game. I ended the call. The screen showed a string of missed calls and texts that I swiped away. They were probably all about the same thing. Guilt, blame, the usual. I looked at the bartender. "Another one, please." He nodded, pouring another shot without a word. Silence settled around me, except for the low murmur from the regulars scattered around. I tried to collect my thoughts. My phone screen lit up again, showing Tom's name. The guy just didn't know when to quit. I flipped the phone face down, letting it go to voicemail. It was futile to talk when the whole crew was going off the rails back there. A few drinks later, the door to the bar creaked open, and in came a chilly gust of evening air. But I didn't look up. It didn't matter who was coming and going. I thought about what just happened, what it all meant. Here I was, sitting in a bar because my family-in-law decided I was the bank. And instead of understanding, my supposed partner turned it into an ultimatum. I finally picked up my phone and typed out a text. "Tom, we're done. Sarah can think what she wants, and your mom can deal with her own damn bills. I won't be part of this circus anymore." Just as I hit send, the phone rang again. This time, I shut it off. I was tired. Tired of the arguing, the demands, and above all, tired of feeling like I was alone in a partnership that was supposed to have my back. When the room finally stopped spinning, and my head felt a little clearer, I knew what had to happen next. It was time to start looking forward, even if I had to do it on my own. No more games, no more being the scapegoat for a family that couldn't see past their own drama. I walked out of the bar, leaving the noise and the night behind. The air was getting colder, and the city lights were starting to blur into the coming darkness. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it was mine to take. What a mess that last evening was. The whole thing at the restaurant blew up bigger than anyone thought. The groom had had it up to here with the drama and ditched the engagement right then and there. Sarah's face when he dropped that bomb, I can't even. No one saw it coming, least of all her. Then the mother-in-law went off the deep end. She was screaming like some banshee, causing such a scene that the groom's folks were ready to dial 911. Disrespect, she was yowling. No consideration. It was chaos, the kind of thing you see on those trashy daytime shows where chairs start flying. Meanwhile, I was done. I filed for divorce and cut phone ties. Tom and his calls? Ignored. His messages? Deleted. The last I heard, him, his sister, my former mother-in-law from hell, they're all holed up in the same house, probably driving each other up the wall. As for me, it felt like I'd finally stopped holding my breath after years underwater. Life's simpler now, but that evening's still the talk whenever I'd bump into people from the old circle. It gets old, you know? So here's the update, for anyone who still cares, I'm living my best, most peaceful life. I'm sitting in my usual spot at the cafe down the street from my place, the one where the coffee is strong and no one asks too many questions. The barista gives me a nod. "The usual?" he asks, like he's asking if the sky's up. "Yep," I say. That's what my days are like now, no fluff or meddling in-laws. Work's a breeze when it's just that, work. Free time is mine to enjoy without a side of guilt trips or obligations. I curl up on my couch, that one piece of furniture that's followed me through all the moves. The springs are shot to hell, but it fits my back just right. I flip on the TV, watching some crime show where they catch the bad guys by minute 40. The peace is what gets me. Not eerie or lonely, just peace. Breathe in, breathe out. No more walking on eggshells or cleaning up family feuds. This is living. When I hit the pillow each night, it's with a sense of I did it. No pat on the back needed. I know my worth, and finally, I'm living like it. I'm eating my lunch when the phone dings. A message from a number I don't know. Probably Tom, using someone else's phone to reach out. I delete it without reading. Not today, Satan, not ever, actually. They used to say, you'll regret this. But here I am, not a single regret in sight. The day drags out, cozy and fine, and it ends with a glass of something smooth and a book I've been meaning to read. The heroine's tough, but fair, reminds me of someone I know. Look, I'm Jess. I crunch numbers for a living, and I guess I'm doing all right for myself. I've got this kid, Alex, a real bright spark, keeps asking questions about everything under the sun. Then there's my other half, Mike. He runs the show at some warehouse, not the career of his dreams, but it pays some of the bills. And it's just enough for Mike, he's not the type to chase more. Our life's what you'd call run-of-the-mill. We wake up, go about our jobs, come back, and do the family thing. Not exciting, but steady. Problem is, the steady's turned shaky lately. Mike, he's been rolling in late from work, looks like he's been through the ringer every time. Bags under his eyes, shirt wrinkled, and his mood stinks. Tried to get him to chat about it, crack that shell of his. But that man's locked up tighter than a bank vault. Mike, what's eating you? I asked him just last night. You're acting all sorts of strange these hours. He just glared at me, all red-eyed and frazzled. It's nothing, Jess. Work's a pain in the neck, that's all. Just lay off, okay? I know when to back off, but it's like a splinter in my mind, you know? He used to be straight with me, and now it's like I'm talking to a brick wall. You're not touching your dinner, Mike. What's up? I tried to nudge him at supper. Nothing fancy, just some meat and potatoes. But he barely poked at it. I said drop it, Jess. I ain't in the mood to chat about my day, he snapped back, pushing the plate away, and that end of discussion looked plastered on his face. Alex piped up from across the table, fork halfway to his mouth. Dad, you gonna come to my game this weekend? You said you'd try. Mike just ruffled Alex's hair, his attempt at a smile more like a wince. We'll see, champ. Your old man's got a lot on his plate right now. I watched them, father and son, an unsaid worry passing between them. That's my world right there, feeling like it might come apart at the seams. There's this static in the air every time Mike walks in late, a mix of sweat and something sour I can't place. He whispers about work stress, but there's a tug in my gut telling me it's more than that, a lot more. Mike's become like those puzzle pieces you find behind the couch, doesn't fit anywhere, doesn't make sense. And the more I push, the more he clams up. What gives? So there you have it. No sugarcoating, no dressing it up. Just our plain Jane life hitting a bit of a rough patch. I've got a kid to raise and bills to pay, and now a husband who's acting like he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. Only thing is, he won't let me carry a piece of that burden. I'm out here trying to figure it out without letting on to Alex that there's trouble brewing. Gone. Just like that, Mike's car was history. Came home on foot, a look on his face I had trouble reading. Jess, he said, his voice jittery, the car's gone. Stolen. So, call the cops, Mike. My brother can sniff this out. Easy, I said. But he was shaking his head before I even finished the sentence. No way, I've got it covered, he insisted, but he wouldn't look me in the eyes when he said it. The whole thing smelled fishy. He'd never had good luck with cars, but stolen? That was a new one. Got it covered how? You got a private detective in your pocket or something? I teased, trying to lighten the mood, but Mike wasn't having any of it. Just back off, Jess. I said I'll handle it. His words came out harsh, and he walked off to the shower, leaving me standing there with a kitchen full of whys and what-ifs. His dad's car became his new wheels. You should have seen it, a battered thing that coughed more than it roared. Borrowing it for a while, he said, each word heavy like stones. We sat down at the kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg, and I watched Alex, who looked more and more like his father every day, swinging his feet as he ate his cereal. He was itching to ask about the car, you could tell, but one look from me kept it shut tight in his mouth. Over the rattle of the morning news and Alex's spoon clinking, I decided to push one more time. We should report it, Mike. Insurance will eat us alive if we don't, I said, real casual. Mike slammed his mug on the table, coffee splashing out. Jess, for the last time, drop it. It's not your problem. Alex's feet stopped swinging, and that's when you know it's real bad, when a kid goes quiet all sudden like. The rest of the day was just nuts and bolts. Mike left in his dad's clunker, and I dropped Alex off at school, my head a mess with thoughts screaming in all directions. By the time I clocked into work, I had settled on one thing: I was going to find out what was going on, with or without Mike. Lunch break, my phone buzzed, it was my brother. Jess, you okay? Heard about Mike's car. Need me to take a look? He offered, always the protector, even though we're adults now. I wanted to say yes, tell him everything, but I hesitated. What if Mike was in deeper than just a stolen car? I'll let you know, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, like it was nothing, just a car gone AWOL, not my world tipping sideways. By the time I got home, the place was silent, no sign of Mike or his troubles. Only Alex at the table, scribbling away at his homework, the TV murmuring in the background. So, here we go again, another chapter in the life of Jess. A missing car, a husband with secrets, and a boatload of unanswered questions. Tomorrow's another day, but one thing's for sure, I can't just sit on my hands. I'm finding out what's going on, one way or another. Mike's not the only one good at keeping things tight under wraps. Ever seen someone there, but not there? That's Mike. Misses dinner, doesn't kiss Alex goodnight, turns invisible come bedtime. Acts like he's on another planet. The weekend rolled around, Alex ready for those bike rides they used to nail every Saturday morning. He's there, helmet on, excitement buzzing off him like bees on a hive. And nothing, Mike's locked away in the bedroom acting like he's turned to smoke. Mike, come on. The kid's waiting. You promised. I yelled through the door, my hand gripping the knob so tight my knuckles got white. I'm not up for it, Jess. Just take him, will you? His voice a muffled surrender from behind the wood. Alex's face fell a mile. I shrugged, combed his hair back with my fingers. Let's go, champ, just you and me this time. We hit the pavement, me pedaling behind him, watching those little legs pump like pistons. He's getting good, too good. Should have been his dad watching. After, over cold sandwiches, I lay it out for his folks. The stolen car, the late nights, the silence heavy as lead. They're good folks, made me feel like family since day one. They listened, hands clasped, a wrinkle of worry etched between shared glances. Jess, kids his age, his mom started, always the forgiving type. They get like this. You ride it out. Midlife thing or not, he's riding out alone. I shot back, not buying any of this phase talk. He's ditching his son, for God's sake. His dad chimed in, cutting the air with that old sense of authority he can't shake off. Give the man space, Jess. We didn't raise him to bail on family. Space? Feels like he's halfway to the moon right now. I fired off, done with sugarcoating bitter pills. They didn't have the answers, none of us did. So, I sat there, the kitchen clock ticking away your standard awkward silence. They love him, but they're clutching at straws, just like me. Back home, I find Mike on the couch blanketed in shadows, the room dark except for the flicker of some late-night show. Alex is long asleep, dreams and all. We need to talk, Mike. Now, I said, my voice steady as a drumbeat, every word a decision. He peels himself off the couch, tired or defeated, it's hard to tell. What is it, Jess. Mike huffs, like it's an effort just to stand. I'm not blind, something's gnawing at you. It's eating us up, all of us. My words clipped out like bullets. Mike's eyes finally lift to meet mine, some spark in there fighting through the fog. Jess, it's a mess you don't need to be in. Oh, I'm in it, Mike. You made sure of that when you started sleepwalking through your life. I'd had it, my patience frayed to strands. He leans on the wall. For a sec, it looked like he'd slide to the floor. I can't, not yet. That voice, a whisper of its regular self. Okay, Mike, let's see how long you can keep up this act. I'm clawing for answers, and if Mike won't hand them over, I'll turn over every rock, every dark corner, until everything that's hidden starts spilling out into the light. For Alex, I'll do it. For us, I'll go the distance. The stillness of the night was shattered by the shrill ring of the phone. It was the sound that heralds news, seldom good. Mike's hand shot out to snatch it up, and the blood drained from his face as he listened to the voice on the other end. There were a few hushed, frantic words, and then silence. Heart problems, he said, voice shaking, looking at me with eyes full of terror. Dad's been taken to the hospital. Before I could even process the information, Mike was already dressed and darting for the door, his father's old car keys in hand. Wait! I'll come with you. I cried out, but he was gone. The door slammed behind him, and the sound echoed through the empty house like a grim reminder that I was now alone with my thoughts and the daunting tick-tock of the wall clock. Hours passed, each minute stretching longer than the last, anxiety my only companion. Doubt began to gnaw at me as I watched the moon trace its path across the sky. Against all instincts that screamed at me to stay put, I picked up the phone and dialed my mother-in-law. Is everything okay with Dad? I breathed into the phone when she picked up. There was a pause, a flicker of confusion in her voice. What are you talking about, dear? He's right here, watching the late show with me. The room spun. Mike, he told me there were heart problems, that Dad was taken to the hospital. Oh, honey, she said, her voice laced with worry and something else, something akin to disbelief. There's no hospital. There's no heart issues. Mike never said a word to us about going anywhere tonight. Bile rose in my throat. The betrayal stung like a slap in the face. My husband, the man who was supposed to be my partner in all things life threw at us, had lied straight to my face. Mike left in a panic. Said it was urgent, I managed to say, my own voice sounding distant and foreign. If he's not with you, then where? We'll figure this out. She cut in, her tone attempting reassurance that couldn't reach me. You just stay there with Alex. We'll sort it all out. After I hung up, the silence of the house screamed louder than the ring of the phone ever did. The trust we had, the foundation we built our family on, felt like it had crumbled in an instant. Where was he, and why lie? The questions blazed in my mind, turning over and over without answers. The phone felt heavy in my hand as Ron's voice finally pierced through the static uncertainty. Jess? What's this late call about? Taking a breath to steady myself, I dove in. Ron, Mike mentioned something about you, about a hospital. Is everything all right? Silence enveloped the line for a brief moment before Ron replied. Hospital? No, nothing like that. I'm fine, Jess. Why would Mike say that? A knot tightened in my gut, and I knew something wasn't right. He said you had heart trouble. He took your car. I'm worried, Ron. All right, I can track where my car's gone off to, he offered after a pause. Give me a moment. We hung up, and the ensuing wait filled the room like a thick fog. Alex's sleepy voice broke the silence with a question. Is Grandpa okay? I smiled reassuringly. We'll know soon. True to his word, half an hour later, Ron's voice relayed through the phone. The car's at the city hospital. A silent alarm went off in my head. Thanks, Ron. We're going to check on this, I said, the last words shadowed by a chilling premonition. Grabbing our coats, I quickly dressed Alex. We shared no words on the matter, the gravity of our mission spoke loud enough. Together, we left the warmth of our home for the cool ambiguity of the night. The city's roads lay mostly empty as we made our way to the hospital, the silence in the car a stark contrast to the clamor of thoughts ricocheting in my mind. When we arrived in the parking lot, I found Ron's car, abandoned under the eerie glow of streetlights. "Do we go inside, Mommy?" Alex inquired, his innocence a striking contrast to the complexity of our situation. I took a deep breath, weighing the options. My instinct urged me to surge forward, to confront the mystery head-on, but caution whispered its words of prudence. The pieces didn't add up, and whatever awaited inside might be something I needed to face without Alex by my side. "We'll approach this together, but carefully, Alex. We'll go in, but we have to be prepared for whatever we might find." He nodded, his small hand finding mine, a gesture of silent solidarity. I took Alex by the hand, making sure he stayed close. "Remember, stay with me no matter what," I said to him as we walked towards the hospital entrance. The automatic doors slid open with a whoosh, and the sterile smell of the place hit my nose. You could never forget that hospital smell. We navigated through the corridors, my eyes scanning, looking for Mike. And then I saw him, just outside one of the rooms. He wasn't alone. I saw the woman first. Her arms cradling a newborn, looking tired and familiar. Mike looked like he had seen a ghost, his face drained of color the moment our eyes met. "What the hell, Mike?" I said, louder than I meant to. The woman stepped back, looking between us, holding the baby closer to her chest. "Who's she?" she asked, her voice blunt. Mike's eyes were glued to my face, his mouth opening and closing with no sound. "Jess, this is not what it looks like," he finally stammered out. "Really? 'Cause it looks pretty bad from where I'm standing," I shot back. The woman piped up again. "He sold his car. For us. To pay the bills here." Mike tried to interrupt, but I put my hand up. "I'm not talking to you right now." Turning to the woman, I asked, "How long has this been going on?" "A while," she said flatly, bouncing the baby slightly. "And the kid." I couldn't even finish the sentence. "Yeah, he's Mike's," she confirmed, looking me right in the eye. I felt like I got punched in the gut. My head was spinning, and I could barely register Alex's hand squeezing mine. "Mommy, is the baby sick?" Alex's small voice brought me back to reality. "No, honey, the baby's fine," I said automatically, still trying to wrap my head around the mess. Mike finally found his voice. "Jess, please, let's talk about this." "Talk?" I almost laughed, but it came out like a bark. "You got a whole secret life here, and you want to talk? You should have talked before it got to this." Mike looked down, and I could see he was shaken, but right now I didn't care. "Jess, I can explain." "Save it, Mike. We're done here," I said, cutting him off. I grabbed Alex's hand and turned to leave. Mike reached out, trying to stop me, but I snapped at him. "Don't you touch me." Walking away, I could still hear him calling after me, but his words were just noise. Alex looked up at me with questions in his eyes, but I wasn't ready to answer them yet. We got to the car, and I strapped Alex into his seat, taking a moment to breathe. I could feel tears pricking my eyes, but I held them back. As we drove away from the hospital, away from the unwelcome surprise, I didn't know what was going to happen. But right then, I knew I had to be strong, for Alex. We barely got home when I saw Ron and Linda's car screech into the driveway. They came out fast, walking towards me like they meant business. Linda had that look, the one that meant trouble, big trouble. "Jess, what's going on?" Ron was the first to speak. His eyes were darting around, looking for Mike. "It's done, Ron. We're done. I'm filing for divorce." "The fairy tale's over," I said, not mincing my words. Linda stepped forward. "What the hell did that boy do now?" The anger in her voice hit the air like a slap. I barely had time to tell them everything. Mike's car pulled in, right on cue. He got out, slow, like he was walking to his own funeral. "What the hell, Mike?" Ron was on him like a hawk. "You've got that girl, with a baby." "A baby, Mike." Mike's head hung low, his voice was barely a whisper. "Dad, I'm sorry. I messed up." "Messed up? You call this a mess up?" Linda was almost screeching now. The woman from the hospital stepped out of Mike's car, baby in her arms, and everything just stopped for a second. The look on Ron and Linda's faces, it was like they saw a ghost. "Who's she?" Linda's voice was ice cold now. Mike looked like he was fighting back tears. She's someone I've been seeing." "Seeing? Well, you have a family?" Ron's voice boomed. Linda chimed in, "And you got her pregnant while you're married to our daughter-in-law? And we find out at a hospital?" The woman stood there, silent, holding the baby closer when Linda's eyes shot daggers at her. "This ain't sliding by, Mike." "No way in hell," I snapped. Mike turned to me, desperation in his voice. "Jess, please. Save it," I cut him off. Linda stepped forward. "You're going to support this child. You're not walking away from this. But believe me, you're gonna pay for breaking our daughter-in-law's heart." Ron nodded. "And we'll be right there with her, every step of the way." Mike just stood there, defeat written all over him. "I'll do whatever it takes." "You bet you will," Ron said, his anger settling into a grim resolve. I looked at all of them, my soon-to-be ex-husband, his mistress, his parents. My lawyer. Tomorrow. I want this settled. Fast. Ron and Linda gave me a nod. "We've got your back," Linda said, and the look in her eye told me she meant every word. I turned on my heel, Alex's hand in mine, and walked back into our now broken home. Mike's voice followed me, saying sorry over and over, but it was too late for sorry. Life had sure done a number on us. But there I sat, on the porch swing, Alex curled up next to me, a math book opened on his lap. The sun was setting, the sky a mix of pink and gold, like a watercolor gone wild. "How's homework going, kiddo?" I asked, not ready to dive back into the adult world just yet. Alex shrugged. "Okay, I guess. The numbers keep doing a dance though." "Yeah, they do that sometimes," I chuckled, ruffling his hair. "They'll settle down if you stare at them long enough." We laughed, the easy sound of it taking the edge off the day. Then the phone buzzed. I pulled it out of my pocket, a text from Linda. "How are you holding up?" it read. I smiled. Linda always had timing like a clockwork. "Getting by. One piece at a time," I texted back. I looked out at the yard, thinking about how different life was now. Mike had taken a serious tumble from the life we once shared. His new place, a cramped apartment above a noisy bar, was a far cry from the house he'd left behind. He was pulling double shifts, trying to make ends meet, pay the alimony and whatever he owed to her. "Mom, when's Dad coming around?" Alex's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Haven't heard, buddy. But you know, we're doing pretty good, you and I answered. "Yeah, just us," he smiled, and there was something in that smile that told me the kid was going to be all right. Then the other phone rang, the landline. Old school. It jarred the quiet of the evening. Alex jumped up to grab it. "I got it, Mom." "Careful there, Speedy," I called after him. I heard his little feet pound the hallway. The sound of his laughter as he chatted with whoever was on the other end warmed the space. He was a resilient little man. I took a deep breath. "Mom, it's for you," he called out, his voice echoing. I picked up where he left off. "Hello? Jess, it's me." Mike's voice was low, almost guilty. "What can I do for you, Mike?" My voice was colder than I intended. Are you both okay?" His voice sounded like it carried the weight of the world. "We're managing, Mike. Alex is doing great." There was silence, a long one, then a defeated sigh. That's good. That's good to hear. Mike, look, we're picking up the pieces here. You should be doing the same, I said, more firmly this time. I am, Jess. Or at least, I'm trying. Another pause. He was always heavy with the pauses. Goodbye, Mike. The click of the phone felt like the end of an era. It kinda was. I walked back onto the porch, the creak of the swing welcoming me back. Alex looked up, his eyes were curious. Life was indeed very different now. Just Alex and me, with Grandma and Grandpa popping in enough to keep us smothered in love and bad jokes. The house was quieter, but it was still full of us, our life, our laughter, our love. The days ahead would still have their challenges. Divorce papers don't wipe away the messiness of life, and co-parenting was a road we were still figuring out how to navigate. But that evening, as the sky turned from pink to a deep blue, a sense of peace settled over the house.
I always thought my life was pretty normal, just like anyone else's. My name is Sarah, and I've spent the last 17 years married to Mike. We've got 3 boys, Jake, the oldest at 15, always buried in his books, Sam, the middle one, 13, a soccer fanatic, and little Max, 10, the comedian of the family. Our life seemed like a typical family's. I was a housewife, happy to be one, while Mike worked as the director of his family's company. We were doing all right, especially since I had some income from investments I made with the money my grandma left me. It wasn't much, but it helped. Things started changing slowly. It was subtle at first, but then it became too obvious to ignore. Mike, who used to be affectionate and caring, began acting differently. His warm smiles turned cold, and his gentle words became harsh. It was a regular Thursday evening. The kids were upstairs, and I was setting up the dinner table when Mike walked in. He looked tired, or maybe just annoyed. I couldn't tell anymore. "Hey, Mike. How was work today?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. He shrugged, barely looking at me. "Same as always, Sarah. Exhausting and endless." I handed him a plate of his favorite pasta, hoping to cheer him up. "Well, maybe this will help." He poked around the food with his fork, not eating. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Sarah, have you looked at yourself lately? You've really let yourself go." His words hit me like a punch. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling a bit. "You know what I mean. You used to take care of yourself, look good. Now, it's like you don't even try." I felt my face burning. I'm taking care of our home, our kids. I don't always have time for myself. He scoffed. "That's just an excuse, Sarah. You could make the time if you wanted to." I was stunned. Mike never used to be like this. He was the one who always told me I was beautiful, no matter what. "I'm not some model, Mike. I'm your wife, the mother of your children. And that's exactly why you should try harder. Look at you. How am I supposed to take you to any company events looking like this?" His words stung. I felt small, insignificant. "I didn't realize my looks were so important to you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "They are, Sarah. They are. And right now, you're just not cutting it." I stood there, feeling a mix of anger, hurt, and confusion. This wasn't the man I married. This was someone else, someone I didn't recognize. The rest of the evening passed in silence. I cleaned up the dishes, trying to process what just happened. Mike went to the living room, probably to avoid any more conversation. It wasn't just a one-off comment from Mike. The criticisms kept coming, each one sharper than the last. It felt like I was living with a stranger. He'd always been so supportive, but now, it was like he was looking for things to pick on. One evening, we were sitting in the living room. The boys were out at friends' houses, and it was just the two of us, which had become increasingly rare. I thought maybe we could have a nice chat, like we used to. "So, Mike, Jake's been talking about colleges already. Can you believe it? Our boy is growing up," I said, trying to start a light conversation. Mike, however, seemed disinterested. Huh, he muttered, not looking up from his phone. I sighed, feeling the familiar sting of being ignored. You know, I was thinking we could do something as a family this weekend. Maybe go for a picnic, like old times. He finally looked up, but his expression was far from warm. Sarah, why do you always avoid talking about the real issues? I was taken aback. What issues, Mike? You, Sarah, you and how you've just given up on yourself. There it was again, that harsh tone that had become all too familiar. Mike, I haven't given up on myself. I'm just busy with the boys, the house. He cut me off. No, that's not an excuse. Look at you. You wear the same old clothes, your hair's always a mess. It's embarrassing. I felt a lump in my throat. Embarrassing? Is that what you think of me? Yes, it is. I mean, when was the last time you even tried to look nice for me? For us. I tried to remember the last time I had dressed up. It had been a while, but did it really matter that much? Mike, I'm your wife, not a doll to dress up. I have responsibilities. And part of those responsibilities is to be presentable, Sarah. Not just roam around like you don't care. I stood up, feeling my anger rising. I do care, Mike. I care about our family. But if you're so concerned about appearances, maybe you should look at yourself too. When was the last time you did something for us, for the family? He stood up too, his face red. That's different, Sarah. I work all day to provide for this family. And I work all day at home to keep this family running. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? There was a tense silence. Then, Mike spoke, his voice cold. Maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I need someone who understands me better. Those words felt like a slap. Is that what you want, Mike? Someone else? He didn't answer. Instead, he just walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, feeling more alone than ever. Despite the heavy air between us, I decided to make a change. Not for Mike, but for myself. I joined a local fitness club, thinking maybe a bit of exercise would help clear my mind. It was a sunny Tuesday morning when I told Mike about it. We were in the kitchen, he was getting ready for work, and I was fixing breakfast. Mike, I joined a fitness club, I said, a bit nervously. He raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued for the first time in weeks. Really? That's unexpected. Yeah, I figured it was time to do something for myself. He chuckled, but it wasn't a warm sound. Well, let's see how long that lasts. I bit my lip, holding back a sharp retort. I'm serious about it, Mike. He shrugged, finishing his coffee. We'll see, Sarah. We'll see. That conversation stayed with me as I headed to the fitness club. Determined to prove him wrong, I threw myself into the workouts. I started jogging in the park every morning, feeling a sense of accomplishment with each stride. One morning, a couple of weeks into my new routine, I was jogging in the park. The air was crisp, and I was pushing myself harder than usual. I wanted to get home before Mike left for work, to show him I was sticking to it. I was so focused on my pace that I didn't see the uneven patch of ground. My foot caught, and I stumbled, falling hard on the path. Pain shot through my leg, and I knew immediately something was wrong. Limping back home, I was a mix of pain and frustration. This was the last thing I needed. Mike was still home when I got back. He looked surprised to see me limping. What happened to you? He asked, more curious than concerned. I fell while jogging, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the pain. He snorted. Jogging? More like tumbling, it seems. I winced, both from the pain and his words. It's not funny, Mike. I think I sprained my leg. He leaned against the counter, a smirk on his face. Well, what did you expect? You can't just jump into these things at your age. I felt a surge of anger. My age? What's that supposed to mean? He shrugged. It means you're not exactly young anymore. These things happen. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, you're saying I shouldn't even try? I'm saying maybe you should have thought it through a bit more. Starting to work out all of a sudden, at your age, it's bound to end like this. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady myself. I was doing it for myself, Mike. To feel better. He shook his head. Well, looks like that backfired, didn't it? I didn't have the energy to argue. I just wanted to sit down and deal with the pain in my leg. Mike left for work, and I was left alone, feeling both physically and emotionally hurt. It seemed like no matter what I did, it just wasn't good enough for him. The days following my fall were tough. My leg was in a brace, and I felt trapped in my own home. Mike's attitude didn't help either. It was like he found joy in my misfortune. It was a Wednesday afternoon, the kids were at school, and I was sitting in the living room with my leg propped up. That's when I heard the knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hobbled to the door, curious and a bit cautious. Opening the door, I was met with a sight that knocked the wind out of me. A young woman, probably in her late 20s, stood there. She was dressed sharply, and there was a confidence in her posture that was hard to miss. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to mask my surprise. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my braced leg. "You must be Sarah. I'm Amanda. I think we need to talk about Mike." My heart sank. Mike? What about him? She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "I think it's time you knew. Mike and I have been seeing each other." I felt like I had been punched. "What are you talking about?" She walked past me into the living room, making herself at home. "I'm talking about Mike, your husband. We're in love, and he's going to leave you for me." I followed her, my mind racing. "That's impossible. Mike would never." She cut me off. "Oh, but he would. And he is. He's tired of this." She gestured around. "And tired of you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This is some kind of joke, right? Mike loves me. We have a family. Amanda laughed, a cold, hard sound. "Love? Please. He's bored with you. He needs someone young, someone exciting. Not a housewife who can't even take care of herself." I felt tears stinging my eyes, but I fought them back. "You don't know anything about us, about our life." "I know enough. I know that Mike wants more, and I'm more than you'll ever be." Her words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper. "You're wrong. He won't leave me. He can't." Amanda stood up, ready to leave. "Believe what you want, Sarah. But it's happening. Mike is mine now. And there's nothing you can do about it." She walked out, leaving me standing there, feeling a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. That evening, when Mike came home, I confronted him. "Mike, we need to talk. Now." He looked surprised but nodded. "What's wrong?" "A woman came here today. Amanda. She said you're leaving me for her." Mike's face changed, and I knew. I just knew. "It's true, isn't it?" I whispered, the reality sinking in. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yes, it's true. I didn't know how to tell you." I felt numb. "How long, Mike? How long have you been lying to me?" "It's not about the time, Sarah. It's about us, about what we've become." I shook my head, tears finally escaping. "What we've become? You mean what you've made us become?" He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I never meant to hurt you. But I can't stay in this marriage. I need more." I looked at him, the man I had loved for so long, and felt nothing but emptiness. "You want a divorce?" He nodded. "Yes, I do." It was like my entire world had crumbled in an instant. Mike, the love of my life, was leaving me for another woman. A woman who had the audacity to come to my home and tell me to my face. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. I wouldn't let this break me. I had my boys, and I had myself. Mike had made his choice, and now I had to make mine. I'll give you your divorce, Mike. But you're going to regret this. One day, you'll see what you've lost. He didn't say anything, just walked away. And I was left there, alone, but with a newfound determination. This wasn't the end for me. It was just the beginning. In the days after Mike dropped the bombshell, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Betrayal, anger, sadness, they all took turns controlling me. But amidst this chaos, a bold idea started to form. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. One evening, as Mike and I sat awkwardly in the living room, a room that once echoed with laughter and love, I decided it was time to confront the future. Mike, we need to talk about the kids, I said, breaking the icy silence. He looked up, clearly uneasy. Yeah, I've been thinking about that too. I've made a decision, I continued, my voice steady. I'm going to move out. Mike's eyes widened. Move out? What about the boys? They're staying with you, I said firmly. He was taken aback. What? No, Sarah, you can't be serious. They need their mother. I leaned forward, my resolve unwavering. They also need their father, Mike. And you need to understand what it takes to be a parent. Full-time, not just weekends or holidays. Mike ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. Sarah, this is crazy. You can't just dump the kids on me and walk away. I'm not dumping them, Mike. I'm giving you a chance to step up. To be the father they deserve. Mike stood up, pacing the room. And what about Amanda? How am I supposed to explain this to her? I shrugged. That's your problem, Mike. You chose her. Now you have to deal with the consequences. Mike stopped pacing and looked at me, desperation in his eyes. Sarah, please. Don't do this. It's not fair to the boys. I stood up too, meeting his gaze. What's not fair is what you're doing to us. You made your bed, Mike. Now you have to lie in it. He sank into the couch, defeated. I can't believe you're doing this. I felt a pang of sympathy, but I pushed it away. This was about more than just me and Mike now. It was about our boys and their future. I'll come to see them, talk to them, but they need to stay with you, I said, my voice softer. Mike nodded, resigned. Okay, Sarah, if that's what you think is best. I knew this was going to be hard, on all of us. But it was a decision that had to be made. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. I talked to the children and told them about my plan. They approved it, and ever made suggestions. Perhaps I was too cruel to them and my husband, but I needed to fight back, including for the sake of my son's future. After moving out, I found myself in a small apartment, a stark contrast to the house I had called home for so many years. The space was quiet, too quiet at times, but it gave me a chance to think, to plan my next steps. It wasn't long before the first phone call came. I was sipping coffee one morning when my phone rang. It was Mike, and he sounded frazzled. Sarah, you need to take the kids. I can't do this, he blurted out as soon as I answered. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Mike, we agreed. They're staying with you. But Sarah, it's too much. I can't handle it. Work is hectic, and Amanda, she's not coping with them around, he explained, his voice tinged with desperation. I felt a twinge of satisfaction, but I pushed it away. You wanted a life with her, Mike. This is part of it. The boys are your responsibility too. Mike's frustration was palpable. They don't listen to me, Sarah. They're always asking for you. It's a mess here. That sounds like parenting, Mike. Welcome to my world for the past 15 years, I replied, a hint of gloating in my voice. There was a pause, then Mike said, "I didn't think it would be this hard." "Well, it is. You'll have to figure it out, just like I did." We ended the call shortly after, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. Mike was finally getting a taste of the life he had always taken for granted. The next call came a few weeks later, this time from Amanda. Her voice was high-pitched and frantic. "Sarah, you have to take these kids. They're unbearable. They don't listen to anything I say." She practically screamed into the phone. I couldn't help but smirk. "They're just being kids, Amanda. What did you expect? They're ruining our life, Sarah. Mike is always tired, and we never have any time together. It's like living in a zoo," she complained. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the moment. "Well, Amanda, maybe you should have thought about that before getting involved with a married man with 3 kids." Amanda huffed. "This is your fault, Sarah. You should be taking care of them, not me." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "No, Amanda. This is the life you chose. You wanted Mike, and everything that comes with him. Deal with it." The call ended with Amanda cursing, and I couldn't help but laugh. It felt good to see her squirm, to see them both realizing how much they had underestimated me and the life I had built around our family. The day I'd been dreading finally arrived, the legal meeting to hash out the divorce and custody details. I walked into the lawyer's office, my nerves taut. There was Mike, looking like a shadow of his former self, and Amanda, her face twisted in annoyance. My lawyer, Mr. Harris, gave me an encouraging nod as we sat down across from them. The mediator, a no-nonsense guy, started off with, "We're here to discuss custody arrangements first." Mike cleared his throat, looking anywhere but at me. "I want joint custody. I can't handle them full-time." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Really, Mike? After all your big talk? Now you're backing down?" Amanda piped up, her voice sharp. "Sarah, stop being such a vindictive witch. You're just trying to make our lives hell." I turned to her, my voice icy. "No, Amanda. I'm making sure my kids get what they deserve. A stable home, not a circus." Mike's lawyer, some slick young thing, tried to smooth things over. "Let's keep this civil. We're here for the kids' sake." I was about to retort when Mike blurted out, "I don't even need the damn kids. They're just a nuisance." The room went silent. Even Amanda looked at him, shocked. That's when Mike's father, who'd been silent till now, erupted. "You ungrateful brat," he bellowed at Mike. "I'm cutting you off. No more money, no more cushy job at the company. You've disgraced us." Mike's face drained of color. "Dad, you can't do that. I need that job." His father was unmoved. "You've made your bed, now lie in it." Turning to the mediator, I said firmly, "I want full alimony for the boys. They shouldn't suffer because their father's a selfish coward." Mike's lawyer started to protest, but Mike shut him down with a wave of his hand. "Fine, she gets what she wants." Amanda was silent, her earlier bravado gone. She looked from Mike to his father, realizing the gravy train had just derailed. As we wrapped up, I felt a strange mix of triumph and sadness. It wasn't a win, not really. But it was a step towards a new life for me and the boys. The dust had settled from the legal showdown, and I was starting to build a new life in a spacious apartment I had rented for me and the boys. It was different, but it felt like a fresh start. One evening, while I was unpacking some boxes, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Mike standing there, looking miserable. "Sarah, can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. "Make it quick, Mike. The boys will be home soon." He walked in, glancing around the new place. "Nice apartment," he muttered. I folded my arms. "What do you want, Mike?" He took a deep breath. I've made a mistake. I was wrong. I want to come back." I looked at him, my heart hardening. Come back? After everything? You must be joking. He shook his head. I'm not. I've lost everything, Sarah. My job, Amanda left me. I've got nothing. I felt a pang of something, but it wasn't enough to sway me. You made your choices, Mike. You have to live with them. Mike's eyes filled with tears. Please, Sarah. I'm begging you. I need my family. I sighed. Your family needed you, but you walked away. You can't just come back because you're alone now. Mike looked defeated. So, that's it? We're really over. I nodded. Yes, Mike. We're over. It's time for both of us to move on. He stood there for a moment longer, then turned and left. I watched him go, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. But mostly, I felt free. Later that night, as I tucked the boys into bed in their new rooms, Jake, the eldest, looked up at me. Mom, are you okay? I smiled, stroking his hair. Yes, Jake. I'm more than okay. We're going to be just fine. He nodded. I'm glad. I like it here. It's different, but it's good. I kissed his forehead. Different can be good. We're starting a new chapter. As I turned off the lights and left their room, I knew that this was just the beginning. A new beginning for me and my boys. We had each other, and that was all we needed. I'm Mila, a 36-year-old woman living what I thought was a fairly ordinary life. I married my college sweetheart, Jack, a man who was once my rock. We didn't have kids, just the two of us and our dreams, living in a house that was finally ours, mortgage-free. This house was a symbol of our years together, bought on a mortgage that we aggressively paid down, especially after I used the inheritance from my dad to make the final payments. Our life was simple but content, or so I believed. Jack, tall and usually unflappable with his finance job, was my partner in everything. We had our share of arguments, like any couple, but I always felt we were a team. His parents, George and Martha, had become like my own. George, a burly, kind-hearted man with a booming laugh, and Martha, a gentle soul who had taken me under her wing from day one. Our relationship was one of mutual respect and affection. Tonight was supposed to be a small celebration, just George and us, marking the end of our mortgage payments. The house was warmly lit, and I had spent the day cooking George's favorite dishes. I remember glancing at the clock, noting Jack's unusual lateness. George arrived first, cheerful as always, but with an undercurrent of concern for his son's tardiness. We chatted in the kitchen, George regaling me with stories of his youth, his laughter filling the room. But as the night grew older, my anxiety crept in. Finally, the doorbell rang, and I rushed to open it, expecting Jack, maybe with a story of traffic or a last-minute work emergency. What I saw instead felt like a scene from a movie. Jack stood there, not alone, but with a young, stylish woman clinging to his arm. She had an air of confidence, almost defiance, as she scanned our home, her eyes lingering on the pictures of our life together on the walls. Jack, what's going on? I managed to get out, my voice a mix of confusion and rising anger. Jack looked different. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with a cold, almost cruel smirk. This is Lana, he said nonchalantly, his grip on her waist possessive. She's going to be my wife. The words hit me like a freight train. Wife? Jack, are you joking? What about us? Our life together? George, who had come to see what the commotion was about, looked as shocked as I felt. Jack, son, what are you saying? Mila is your wife. Lana finally spoke, her voice sharp and businesslike. Looks like a nice place. We'll probably change a few things once it's ours. Jack's next words felt surreal. Mila, I want a divorce. It's time you left. I was stunned, my mind racing. Divorce? Jack, we built this life together, and you want to throw it away for her. George's face was red with anger and disbelief. Jack, think about what you're doing. This is madness. Jack shrugged, dismissive. My mind's made up. Start packing, Mila. This house isn't yours anymore. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as George took my arm. Mila, let's go. You don't need to take this. We left the house, my home, a place filled with memories now tainted by betrayal. I spent the night at George and Martha's, their kindness a small comfort in the storm of my suddenly shattered life. I woke up in George and Martha's guest room, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. The events of last night replayed in my mind, each detail a fresh jab of pain. I could hear George and Martha in the kitchen, their voices a low murmur. Dragging myself out of bed, I stumbled into the kitchen, where George was making coffee and Martha was setting the table. They both looked up as I entered, their faces a mix of concern and anger. Morning, Mila, George said gruffly, handing me a cup of coffee. Slept any? Not really, I replied, my voice hoarse. Feels like a nightmare. Martha came over and gave me a hug. That boy has lost his mind, Mila. You don't deserve this. I sipped the coffee, feeling its warmth but not much else. I don't know what to do, Martha. My whole life just turned upside down. George slammed his cup on the table, his usual jovial demeanor gone. We'll not let him get away with this, Mila. He can't just throw you out like yesterday's garbage. Martha nodded, her eyes fierce. You've put too much into that house, into that marriage. It's not right. I felt a surge of anger, thinking about Jack and Lana in my house. I paid for most of that house. My inheritance, my savings. George's eyes lit up. That's it. You have rights, Mila. That house is as much yours as it is his. Martha was quick to agree. Yes, you need to fight for what's yours. Don't let that woman take everything from you. I started to feel a fire building inside me, fueled by their support. You're right. I won't let Jack and his mistress walk all over me. George stood up, determination on his face. We'll get a lawyer, someone who can sort this mess out. You won't be alone in this, Mila. Martha squeezed my hand. We're with you, every step of the way. That boy needs a lesson on how to treat people. Sitting there with them, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could get through this. But I knew it was going to be a long, hard fight. The morning at George and Martha's had stirred something in me, a sense of resolve I hadn't felt in a long time. I spent the day buried in financial records, piecing together every contribution I'd made towards our home. The dining table was littered with bank statements, mortgage documents, and old receipts, tangible proof of my investment in what was supposed to be our shared dream. George, sitting across from me, was meticulously going through each document. Look at this, Mila. You've paid more than half of the mortgage and that's not even counting your inheritance. You have a strong claim to the house. I nodded, my fingers tracing the figures that represented years of my life. I'm going to call Jack. He needs to understand he can't just erase me from his life and take everything we built together. Martha, who had been brewing some coffee, set a cup in front of me. Be clear and stand your ground, Mila. He's used to walking all over you, but not this time. I dialed Jack's number. It rang twice before he picked up. Mila? What do you want? His voice was dismissive, cold. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. Jack, I've been looking over our finances. It turns out I've put more money into the house. My inheritance, my savings, it adds up to me owning 2/3 of the house. There was a brief silence on the line. You're joking, right? No, Jack. I'm dead serious. I've calculated it all. If you want to keep the house, you need to buy out my share. That's $266,000. I could almost hear his sneer through the phone. You think you can just demand money out of the blue? This isn't a demand, Jack. It's what I'm owed. It's fair. You can either pay me, or we sell the house and split the money. Your choice. Jack's voice was laced with annoyance. Fine, you'll get your money. But after this, we're done. I hung up, my heart racing. He agreed to pay, I said, half in shock. George was beaming with pride. You did good, Mila. Standing up to him like that. Martha came over and hugged me. I'm proud of you, Mila. You're taking control of your life again. That afternoon, as I sorted through more paperwork, George and Martha shared stories of their own struggles and triumphs, reminding me that resilience was a family trait. We discussed lawyers, next steps, and strategies, turning their kitchen into a war room of sorts. As evening fell, George cooked dinner, a simple stew that filled the house with a comforting aroma. We ate together, talking about everything but the situation at hand, giving me a much-needed break from the stress. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I wasn't facing it alone. With George and Martha's support, I had a fighting chance. And as I drifted off to sleep, I clung to that thought like a lifeline. The morning of the divorce proceedings, I walked into the lawyer's office with a steely resolve. The office was cold and sterile, the kind of place where futures were dismantled and rearranged. Jack entered, his face an emotionless mask. He wasn't alone. Lana, his mistress, was glued to his side. Her confidence seemed forced, a thin veneer over her uncertainty. I could feel their surprise as they saw me sitting there, calm and composed. Before Jack could even find his words, I cut to the chase. I'm pregnant, Jack. Jack's eyes widened, his composure slipping. What? Pregnant? Lana's face twisted from confidence to confusion and then to rage. You said you hadn't touched her in months. You lying jerk. I ignored her outburst and continued, I'm asking for alimony, Jack. $800 a month, for the next 21 years. For our child. The lawyer, Mr. Harris, a middle-aged man with a stern face, nodded in approval. Given the circumstances, Mrs. Smith's request is perfectly reasonable. Jack looked like he had been punched. This is insane. You can't just spring this on me and expect me to pay up. I met his gaze squarely. I can and I am. You made your bed, now lie in it. You owe this to our child, if not to me. Lana was fuming, her voice shrill with anger. Jack, you can't do this. She's clearly trying to trap you. Jack, flustered and overwhelmed, ran a hand through his hair. I need time to think. Mr. Harris interjected, Mr. Smith, the law is clear. You have a financial responsibility to your child. Jack slumped into the chair, defeated. Fine, he muttered. I'll pay the alimony. As they left, Lana was hissing into Jack's ear, her facade of poise completely shattered. I remained seated, feeling a mixture of triumph and sadness. This wasn't just about the money, it was about standing up for myself and my future child. In the following weeks, I worked with Mr. Harris to iron out the details. He was impressed with my resolve, often remarking on my newfound toughness. You're not the same woman who walked into my office a month ago, he said during one of our meetings. I smiled, feeling a sense of empowerment. I guess I'm not. I have someone else to think about now. As I left his office after signing the final papers, I felt a sense of closure. The battle was tough, but I had come out stronger. I was ready to face whatever came next, not just for me, but for my child as well. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a say in it. After the tumultuous divorce proceedings, I found an unexpected source of strength in Jack's parents, George and Martha. We sat in their cozy living room, a stark contrast to the cold lawyer's office, plotting our next move. George, always a man of action, was pacing the room. We need to show that scoundrel he can't just trample over our family, he said, his voice tinged with anger. Martha, ever the strategist, added, we've got to be smart about this. We can't just barge in there and make a scene. I nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. I agree. But what can we do? He's made his bed with Lana. George stopped pacing and turned to me. What if we visit them? Regularly. Make our presence felt. Remind Jack of the family he's turning his back on. Martha's eyes lit up. Yes, and it'll drive that little homewrecker up the wall. She won't like us being around, reminding her of what she's done. I couldn't help but smile at their cunning plan. You think it'll work? Make her uncomfortable? George grinned. Oh, I'm sure it will. We'll be the most annoying, ever-present in-laws. She won't know what hit her. Martha clapped her hands together. We'll start tomorrow. A nice, long, unannounced visit. The next day, we executed our plan. George rang the doorbell of what used to be my home, a big smile plastered on his face as Jack opened the door. Son. We thought we'd drop by. Spend some quality time together, George boomed, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Lana appeared behind Jack, her smile forced. Oh, what a surprise. And what is she doing here? Martha breezed past her, adding, she's with us. We just couldn't stay away. It's been too long. We spent hours there, talking loudly, laughing, and reminiscing about old times, pointedly ignoring Lana's growing discomfort. Every time she tried to interject or change the subject, George or Martha skillfully steered the conversation back. As we left, Lana's frustration was evident. She was fuming, barely managing a fake smile. In the car, Martha chuckled. Did you see her face? She was about to explode. George was laughing too. We're just getting started. That girl has no idea what she's in for. I sat in the back seat, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. It was a small, petty victory, but after everything that had happened, it felt good to take some control back, to push back against the injustice of it all. With George and Martha by my side, I felt stronger, ready to face whatever came next. A few weeks after our in-law intervention strategy began, I received unexpected news from Martha during one of our coffee chats. Mila, you won't believe it. Jack's put the house up for sale, she said, her voice a mix of shock and satisfaction. I almost choked on my coffee. What? Why would he do that? Martha shrugged. Seems like Lana can't stand us being around. She's pushing him to move. I pondered the situation, an idea slowly forming in my mind. Martha, what if I bought the house back? George, who had been quietly reading the newspaper, looked up. Buy it back? You think that's a good idea? I nodded. Yes, but at a lower price. Jack's desperate, and I have the money from the settlement. It's perfect. Martha smiled slyly. That would be quite the turn of events. Imagine Lana's face if she knew. I contacted a realtor friend, explaining the situation and my plan. She agreed to help, ensuring my identity remained hidden during the negotiations. A week later, I sat with my realtor friend, discussing our strategy. Jack's asking for a high price, but we know he's desperate. Let's lowball him. My realtor nodded. I'll start the negotiations. He won't know it's you until the deal is sealed. The negotiations went back and forth for days. Finally, Jack caved, accepting a much lower offer than his initial asking price. My realtor friend called me with the news. We got it, Mila. He accepted the offer, she said, barely containing her excitement. I couldn't help but laugh. I can't believe it. I'm buying my house back. The day we closed the deal, I met my realtor at the office. You're now the proud owner of your old house, she said, handing me the keys. The day I reclaimed my house was a day of triumph. I stood outside the familiar front door, the weight of the keys in my hand symbolizing so much more than mere ownership. My heart pounded with a mix of excitement and apprehension as I prepared to face Jack and Lana one last time in what was once our shared home. Unlocking the door, I stepped inside. The sight of Jack and Lana, surrounded by boxes in the midst of packing, brought a sense of surreal finality. They both looked up, shock and disbelief etched on their faces. "What the hell, Mila? How did you get in here?" Jack's voice was a mixture of anger and confusion. I couldn't help but smirk. "Oh, didn't you hear? I'm the new owner." "Surprise!" Lana's face turned a shade of red, her eyes wide in shock. "You? This has to be some kind of sick joke." Crossing my arms, I leaned against the door frame. "No joke, Lana. I bought the house. It's mine now, and you two are trespassing." Jack's face contorted with anger. "This is low, even for you, Mila. You think you can just waltz back in here and take over?" I straightened up, my voice firm and unwavering. "Yes, Jack, that's exactly what I'm doing. You wanted me out, and now I'm back. My house, my rules. Time for you to leave." Lana, fuming, spat out, "You can't do this. We have rights." I walked into the living room, standing my ground. "The only right you have right now is to walk out of my house. I suggest you do it quickly." Jack, realizing the futility of arguing, began to gather his belongings. Lana followed suit, her movements jerky with frustration. As they left, Lana hissed at me, "You haven't won anything, Mila." Watching them leave, I felt a surge of empowerment. This house, which had witnessed the rise and fall of my marriage, was now a symbol of my resilience. It was a battleground where I had emerged victorious. After the door closed behind them, I walked through the empty rooms. Each space echoed with memories, both good and bad, but now it was time to make new ones. I envisioned the house filled with laughter and love once more, a sanctuary for me and my future child. Sitting down in the quiet living room, I allowed myself a moment to take it all in. I had come full circle, but this time, I was in control, a victor reclaiming her kingdom. The journey had been fraught with pain and betrayal, but it had led me to this moment of triumph. My house, my rules, my life. I was ready to start anew, stronger and more determined than ever. One afternoon, as I was arranging the nursery for my soon-to-arrive baby, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find George and Martha, beaming with smiles. "Mila, dear, how are you holding up?" Martha asked as she stepped inside, her eyes taking in the changes I'd made. "I'm doing well, Martha." "Getting ready for the baby," I replied, leading them into the living room. George, carrying a bag of baby clothes, chuckled. "This little one is going to be spoiled rotten by us, you know that, right?" I laughed, the sound bright and genuine. I wouldn't have it any other way. As we sat, chatting and laughing, another knock came at the door. This time, it was Jack. He looked different, worn out, a little defeated. "Can we talk, Mila?" Jack's voice was low, lacking its usual confidence. I hesitated but nodded, stepping outside to talk to him privately. I messed up, Mila," Jack started, not meeting my eyes. "Lana left me. I'm broke, and I was hoping." I cut him off, my voice steady. "Hoping for what, Jack? For me to take you back? After everything?" Jack's face crumpled. "I know I don't deserve it, but I have nowhere else to go." I looked at him, the man I once loved, now just a stranger filled with regrets. "Jack, I've moved on. I'm starting a new life, for me and my baby. You need to do the same." He nodded slowly, the reality of the situation sinking in. "I understand. I'm sorry, Mila." As he walked away, I felt a closure I didn't know I needed. Turning back to the house, I saw George and Martha watching through the window, their expressions a mix of concern and support. He won't bother you again, will he? George asked as I walked back in. I shook my head. No, he won't. I made it clear. Martha hugged me. You're so strong, Mila. We're so proud of you. Sitting back down, surrounded by the people who had become my true family, I felt a sense of peace. The journey had been long and fraught with pain, but it had led me here, to a place of strength and new beginnings. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape, and I looked forward to every moment of it.
Look, it's not like Mark and I had fireworks or anything when we met. We just clicked, you know? We were two people who found out we fit well together, and that was that. Love came later, like a surprise guest at a party you didn't know you were throwing. I'm Emily, by the way. Emily Johnson. Well, now it's Patterson since I married Mark. Mark's a great guy, steady and kind. But his family? That's a whole other story. His dad, Mr. Patterson, he's all right. A quiet man who loves his garden more than anything. But his mom, Mrs. Patterson, and we just never hit it off. Then there's Linda, married to Mark's older brother Dave. She's the perfect daughter-in-law, always agreeing with Mrs. Patterson, always a step ahead in pleasing her. It's like she's playing a role in some drama where she's the star, and Mrs. Patterson is the adoring audience. So, one day, we're all at their place for dinner. Mark and I, Dave and Linda, and the Pattersons, of course. Mrs. Patterson's going on and on about their new house. You know, the one they got with a huge mortgage? She's like a broken record, always comparing it to our small apartment. Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. You really should think about upgrading, Emily. Living in such a cramped space, it's just sad. I tried to keep my cool. We're happy with what we have, Mrs. Patterson. It's cozy. Linda chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Oh, but just imagine having a place like this. You must be so envious. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea for me to let it go. I bit my tongue and forced a smile. Yeah, Linda, maybe one day, I said, keeping my voice light. Mr. Patterson, trying to change the subject, asked Mark about his work. I was grateful for the distraction. Mark talked about his latest project, and for a moment, we all fell into a more comfortable conversation. But Mrs. Patterson couldn't help herself. Well, it's good you're keeping busy, Mark. But with Emily not working, I do wonder how you manage. It must be tough. I felt my face flush. Actually, I've been thinking about starting my own business, I said, more to stand my ground than anything else. Mrs. Patterson raised an eyebrow. A business? What can you possibly do? Before I could answer, Linda laughed. Oh, let's not bore ourselves with fantasies. More wine, anyone? The evening dragged on, filled with more jabs and thinly veiled insults. By the time Mark and I got back to our apartment, I was fuming. Mark tried to calm me down. Hey, just ignore them. We know what we have, and that's all that matters. I nodded, but inside, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being looked down upon, of being the underdog in a family that thrived on appearances and material wealth. Little did I know, things were about to get a whole lot more complicated. Life's funny, you know? One minute you're thinking you've got it all figured out, and the next, you're wondering how you got stuck in this sitcom of a family drama. That's how it felt every time we visited Mark's parents. Their new house was like a trophy, big, shiny, and always on display. I remember this one Saturday. Mark and I were at our place, enjoying our usual lazy morning routine, when he got a call from his dad, asking if we could come over. I knew what that meant. Another round of show off the house and make Emily feel small. We got there, and Mrs. Patterson was in full hostess mode, guiding us through rooms we'd seen a dozen times already. And here's the new coffee table we got. Italian marble, you know. It's quite expensive, but you get what you pay for. Mark, bless him, always tried to be diplomatic. Looks great, Mom. Really ties the room together. I just nodded along. What else could I do? Then came the inevitable comparison. I just can't imagine how you two manage in that tiny apartment of yours. It must feel so cramped, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice all sugary concern. I felt my patience wearing thin. It's not that bad, Mrs. Patterson. We like it. she tisked, shaking her head. But you deserve better, Emily. A woman should have a proper home, not some shoebox. Before I could bite back a retort, Mark's dad, Mr. Patterson, called out from the kitchen. Anyone wants a beer? I'll help you, Dad, Mark said quickly, giving me a look that said, please, no drama. I was left alone with Mrs. Patterson and Linda. Linda, ever the eager sidekick, piped up. You know, Emily, there's a certain charm to living minimally, but of course, it's not for everyone. Some of us prefer comfort. Exactly, Linda. Comfort and style, Mrs. Patterson added, glancing around her lavish living room. I forced a smile. Well, everyone has their own taste, right? We're happy with what we have. Mrs. Patterson sniffed. Of course, dear. Happiness is all relative after all. The rest of the visit was more of the same subtle digs and not so subtle boasts. By the time we left, I was mentally exhausted. On the drive back, Mark tried to lighten the mood. Hey, don't let them get to you. You know how they are. I sighed, staring out the window. I know, it's just... It feels like it's never going to end, you know? Mark reached over and squeezed my hand. We'll get through it. We always do. But as we drove back to our shoebox, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of frustration. Why did it always have to be a competition with them? Why couldn't they just be happy for us as we were? Life's like a roller coaster, they say. You never see the twist coming. That week was one such twist for me. I got a call from my mom, telling me that Grandpa had passed away. I was heartbroken, of course. He was always kind to me, a bit of a silent supporter in my corner. The shock came when we found out he left me a pretty hefty sum, $500,000. I couldn't believe it. Mark was happy for me, in his quiet way. That's great, Em. Grandpa really cared about you. But when we told his family, well, that was a whole different story. We were at another family dinner when I mentioned it, not thinking much of it. Mrs. Patterson's eyes lit up like Christmas lights. $500,000? My word, Emily, that's quite a sum. Linda was quick to add her 2 cents. Oh, the things you could do with that money. But the mood shifted when Mr. Patterson coughed, a deep, rattling sound that had us all looking his way. He waved us off. Just a bit under the weather, that's all. The conversation moved on, but I couldn't shake off the concern for Mr. Patterson. He looked pale, more tired than usual. It was only a couple of days later when we got the news. Mark's voice was somber when he told me, Dad's sick, Em. Really sick. The doctors are saying it's serious. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. How bad? Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. They're not sure. Could be weeks, maybe less. The news hit the family hard. Mrs. Patterson was a mess, but not in the way you'd expect. It was more about the what now than the what if. We were in their living room, Mrs. Patterson pacing like a caged animal. What are we going to do? The mortgage, the bills. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mrs. Patterson, shouldn't we be more worried about Mr. Patterson right now? She rounded on me, her eyes sharp. Of course I'm worried about him, but life goes on, Emily. We have to think about these things. Linda was nodding along, ever the faithful echo. She's right, Emily. It's important to be practical. I looked at Mark, hoping for some support, but he just looked tired, torn between his ailing father and his panicking mother. I bit back any further comments. It wasn't the time or place. But as we left that night, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. It wasn't just Mr. Patterson's illness that worried me. It was the way Mrs. Patterson and Linda were so focused on the money, the house. It felt like priorities were all wrong, and I had a sinking feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. Mark's dad's condition worsened fast. It was like watching a candle flicker out. We were spending more time at their place, trying to be there for him, you know? But Mrs. Patterson, she was a whole different story. Always talking about the mortgage, the bills, as if that was the biggest worry. One evening, we were all there, the whole family. Mr. Patterson was lying in bed, looking frail and tired. Out of nowhere, he asked to speak to Mark alone. Just them two. It was strange, seeing him so serious. Mark looked taken aback, but nodded. Sure, Dad, let's talk. They went into the bedroom and closed the door. That's when I noticed Mrs. Patterson and Linda. They were like cats who heard a can opener. Their ears practically perked up. "What do you think they're talking about?" Linda whispered to Mrs. Patterson, not even trying to hide her curiosity. Mrs. Patterson had that look, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "I don't know, but I bet it's about the will or the house." I was standing there, feeling awkward, when Linda turned to me. "Emily, you must be dying to know, right? I mean, with your husband being the only son and all." I shrugged, not wanting to play into their game. It's their business. If Mark wants to tell me, he will. But inside, I was curious. What was so important that it had to be said in private? After what felt like ages, Mark came out. His face was unreadable. Mrs. Patterson and Linda pounced like hawks. "Well, what did he say?" Mrs. Patterson demanded. Mark shook his head. "It's personal, Mom. Dad just had some things to get off his chest." Linda tried a different angle. "But it must be about his will, right? Or the house?" Mark's expression didn't change. "Linda, I'm not discussing it. It was a private conversation." The air was tense after that. Mrs. Patterson kept shooting me these looks, like I was hiding something. But the truth was, I knew as little as she did. That night, back at our place, I asked Mark about it. "So, what did your dad want to talk about?" Mark was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at me, his eyes serious. "He's worried, Em. About Mom, the house, everything. He just wanted to make sure I knew what to do, after—" I nodded, understanding. Of course, but deep down, I had this feeling that there was more to it, something Mark wasn't telling me. And whatever it was, I knew it was big. Mr. Patterson's passing hit everyone like a ton of bricks. It was one of those times when you realize life's too short, but some people never get that memo. The funeral was barely over when Mrs. Patterson started talking about the mortgage again. We were all at their house after the service, kind of a somber gathering when she brought it up. Now that he's gone, we need to think about the future. The mortgage on this house won't pay itself. Linda was nodding along, always her loyal supporter. It's a lot of responsibility, especially now. I was still in my black dress, feeling the weight of the day, when Mark's mom turned to me. "Emily, you recently came into some money, right? It only seems fair that you contribute, given the circumstances." I was stunned. Was she really asking me to pay off their mortgage with my inheritance? "Mrs. Patterson, it's not why Grandpa left me that money." Mark was rubbing his temples, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but there. "Mom, let's not do this now, please." But she was like a dog with a bone. "Mark, I'm just being practical. We're family, and families support each other. Emily, you can afford it now, can't you?" I felt my face getting hot. It's not about affording it. It's about what's right. That money was meant for me and Mark, for our future. Mrs. Patterson's face hardened. "Well, this is your family's future too, isn't it? Unless you don't consider us family." Before I could reply, Mark squeezed my hand. "Let's talk about this later, okay? It's been a long day." But Mrs. Patterson wasn't having it. "No, I want to know now. What will you do, Emily? Will you help your family or not?" The room was tense. Linda was watching me like a hawk, waiting for my response. I took a deep breath. We'll think about it, but this isn't the time or the place to decide." Mrs. Patterson seemed somewhat appeased, but her eyes were cold. "Fine, but remember, family is everything. We have to stick together." As we left, I felt Mark's hand in mine, tight and reassuring. But inside, I was reeling. The nerve of her, asking for my inheritance like it was nothing. It felt like she was trying to claim something that wasn't hers, and it didn't sit right with me at all. After much back and forth and a heavy heart, I decided to use my inheritance to pay off the mortgage on Mrs. Patterson's house. It was a decision I didn't take lightly, and I did it mostly for Mark's sake. We were at Mrs. Patterson's house for a dinner she organized to celebrate the mortgage being paid off. The whole event felt surreal, like being thanked for a favor I never wanted to give. As we sat down for dinner, Mrs. Patterson was beaming. "Emily, this is such a generous contribution you've made. We're all deeply thankful." I nodded, a tight smile on my face. "Happy to help, Mrs. Patterson." Then Linda chimed in with her usual saccharine tone. Really, Emily, you're just too kind. The dinner was awkward but manageable until Mrs. Patterson stood up with a glass in her hand for a toast. I have something to announce. Now that the mortgage is taken care of, I've decided to give this house to Dave and Linda. My jaw dropped. Excuse me? What did you just say? I expected Mark to be as shocked as I was, but to my surprise, he just nodded and smiled. Is that so, Mom? Interesting decision. His calm response threw me off. Why wasn't he upset? Mrs. Patterson looked pleased as punch. Yes, it only seems right. They need it more, and after all, Emily, you and Mark are doing fine on your own. Linda's grin was wide, almost gloating. We're just so grateful, aren't we, Dave? Dave nodded, looking like the cat that got the cream. I was fuming, feeling betrayed and used. We paid off this house with my money. How can you just give it away to them? Mrs. Patterson's expression was firm, almost challenging. I'm still the head of this family, Emily. It's my decision to make. Mark's hand on my knee under the table was a silent message to stay calm. His eyes were telling me he had a plan. As the dinner descended into an uncomfortable silence, my mind was racing. What was Mark up to? He clearly knew something I didn't. The look in his eyes was not of defeat, but of someone holding an ace up their sleeve. As we drove back, I turned to Mark. You knew, didn't you? You knew what your mother was going to do. Mark's smile was mysterious. Let's just say, I had a feeling. Don't worry, Em. This isn't over yet. His words were cryptic, but they gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we weren't as outplayed as I thought. Sitting in our living room, the tension was thick. Mark finally broke the silence. Em, there's something you should know. About the house. Dad did something before he passed. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. What are you talking about? Mark took a deep breath. Dad knew about Mom's plans with the house. He didn't trust her to do right by us. So he changed the mortgage and the house deed into our names. I was stunned. What? But how? He did it right after he found out about his illness, Mark explained. He wanted to make sure the house went to those who really paid for it. That's us, Em. We own the house now. I couldn't believe it. Mr. Patterson had seen through his wife's intentions and protected us. But why keep it a secret? I asked. Mark looked down. Dad asked me to. He didn't want more drama until it was absolutely necessary. Before we could talk further, there was an aggressive knock. Mrs. Patterson, Dave, and Linda stood at our door, their faces twisted in anger. Mrs. Patterson wasted no time. Mark, you need to explain this nonsense about the house. This is outrageous. Mark stood up, calm but firm. Mom, Dad knew what was happening. He legally transferred the house to us, the mortgage too. We paid it off, so now it's ours by law. Their reactions were explosive. Mrs. Patterson's face turned red with fury. That's impossible. He would never do that to me. Linda was almost hysterical. This is a lie. You're trying to steal our inheritance. Dave looked like he was about to explode. You can't just take the house, Mark. It's not yours. Mark handed them a folder. Here are the papers. The deed, the mortgage transfer, everything. It's all legal and binding. Mrs. Patterson snatched the papers, her hands trembling. As she scanned them, her face drained of color. This is a trick. You must have forced him, she screamed. No, Mom. Dad was clear-headed. He did this to protect what's fair, Mark replied, his voice steady. The argument went on, their accusations filling the room. But the truth was in black and white. The house was legally ours. You've torn this family apart, Linda yelled, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Patterson turned to me, eyes filled with hatred. You've done this, Emily! You and your money! But I stood my ground, feeling a sense of justice. No, Mrs. Patterson, this was Mr. Patterson's decision. He wanted to right a wrong. Eventually, they left, seething with anger and disbelief. The door closed behind them, leaving us in a bittersweet silence. We had the house, but at what cost? Yet, in my heart, I knew we had honored Mr. Patterson's wishes. He had given us a home, and in doing so, had also given us a new start. We thought the worst was over until Dave, red-faced with anger, burst into our house a few days later. "You think you've won, huh?" Dave was practically shouting. "Dad paid a chunk of the mortgage before he died, $100,000. That means part of the house belongs to us." Mark remained calm, something I'd always admired about him. "Dave, Dad thought of that. He asked me to deposit an equivalent amount into a separate account in case of disputes." I was standing in the corner, watching the scene unfold. Dave, his face a mix of anger and confusion, and Mrs. Patterson, who had followed him in, looking like a thundercloud. "What? That's preposterous," Mrs. Patterson stammered. Mark continued, "The $100,000 will be divided among the heirs, you, Mom, and me. That was Dad's wish." Mrs. Patterson was shaking with rage. "This is a trick! You're manipulating everything! You've always been cruel and selfish!" Linda, tears streaming down her face, joined in. "How can you do this to your own family? It's heartless!" The air was thick with tension and accusations. I felt a surge of courage and stepped forward. "Enough!" I raised my voice, something I rarely did. "This is our home. Dad made his decision, and it's legal. It's time you all accept it." Dave was seething. "This isn't the end, Mark. We won't let this go." Mark's response was firm, yet calm. "You do what you need to, Dave. But this was Dad's decision. We're just honoring it." The confrontation ended with Mrs. Patterson, Dave, and Linda leaving our house, their threats and accusations still hanging in the air. As the door closed behind them, Mark and I were left in the quiet of our home, a mixture of relief and sadness in the air. Mark wrapped his arms around me. "I'm sorry you had to go through all this, Em." I leaned into his embrace. "It's not your fault. We did what was right." We stood there for a moment, in the home that had caused so much turmoil, but was now truly ours. The story ends with us, living peacefully in the house, while Mrs. Patterson moved in with Dave and Linda in their small apartment. It wasn't an easy victory, and the family ties were strained, but we had each other and a home that was ours, fair and square. That was enough for us. In the heart of a quaint town, nestled among rolling hills and meandering streams, I grew up in a world far removed from the glitz and glamour of city life. Our small, weathered house, with its creaking wooden floors and windows offering views of sprawling fields, was a universe in itself. It was here, amidst the simplicity and warmth of family love, that my story began. My parents, though not affluent, were rich in kindness and wisdom. My father, a local carpenter, had hands that were roughened by years of labor, but gentle in touch, crafting not just furniture, but also instilling in me the values of hard work and humility. My mother, a schoolteacher, filled our home with books and stories, weaving tales that sparked my imagination and nurtured my dreams. Life in our small town was unhurried and unpretentious. Neighbors greeted each other with familiarity, and community events were the highlights of our social calendar. I cherished this life, finding joy in the small pleasures, the fresh scent of earth after rain, the rustling of leaves underfoot, and the chorus of birds at dawn. It was at the local library where I first encountered Mark. He was unlike anyone I had known, a visitor from the city, with an air of sophistication yet an unassuming nature. His family was well known in the business circles, their wealth and influence reaching far beyond the city's skyscrapers. But Mark, with his easy smile and genuine interest in my mundane tales, was a refreshing anomaly in that world. Our initial conversations were tentative, like two worlds cautiously orbiting each other. He spoke of city life, the fast pace, the endless opportunities, and the dazzling lights. I shared stories of my town, the annual harvest festival, the serene walks by the stream, and the close-knit community. In those early days, we would often meet at the old park bench by the lake, our conversations stretching for hours. The lake, with its placid waters reflecting the changing hues of the sky, bore witness to our growing connection, an invisible thread weaving our disparate worlds into one. "Anna," Mark said to me one evening, his voice tinged with a vulnerability I had not seen before. "I have always been surrounded by people who care more about wealth and status. But with you, I found a serenity that I didn't know existed. you've shown me a different way of life, one that's genuine and full of warmth." His words stirred something deep within me. "Mark, where we come from doesn't define us. It's who we are when we're together that matters. You've brought a new perspective into my life, opening my eyes to dreams I never dared to have." As our relationship deepened, Mark confided in me about his family, particularly his mother, a woman of elegance but stringent expectations. He spoke of her with respect, yet there was an underlying concern in his words. "She has her own ideas about who I should be with. I'm just worried about how she'll react to, well, to us." I reached out, taking his hand in mine, feeling the slight tremor. "We'll face that together," I assured him. "Love isn't about backgrounds or expectations. It's about two people who choose each other against all odds." The day Mark proposed was as unassuming as our love. No grand gestures, just a heartfelt promise of a life together. As I looked into his eyes, brimming with hope and love, I knew this was just the beginning. The evening I was set to meet Mark's family, my nerves were on edge. The grandeur of their mansion loomed large as we approached, a stark reminder of the different worlds Mark and I came from. Mark held my hand, giving me a reassuring look. "Just be yourself, Anna. That's all you need to be." I smiled weakly, trying to quell the rising anxiety. "I just hope your mom doesn't think I'm out of place." Mark sighed, a hint of concern in his eyes. "Mom can be a bit much. Just remember, I'm here with you." As we entered the opulent dining room, Mark's mother, Marion, a statuesque woman with an air of austerity, greeted us. Her eyes quickly took me in, a flicker of disapproval passing over her face. "So, this is the young lady who's captured my son's heart. Interesting choice, Mark." Dinner was an elaborate affair, the table set with dishes I couldn't even name. Mark's mother, ever the gracious host, offered me a plate with a sly smile. "I suppose these dishes might be a bit too sophisticated for your taste, Anna. We can get something simpler if you'd prefer." I felt a flush of embarrassment, but managed a polite decline. "No, thank you. I'm always eager to try new things." As the evening progressed, her comments grew more pointed. She eyed my dress, a simple but neat outfit I had thought was appropriate. "Is that what passes for evening wear in your town? It must be challenging to find good clothes on a modest budget." Mark jumped in, trying to steer the conversation elsewhere, but his mother was unrelenting. "Tell me, Anna, what do your parents do? It's always fascinating to learn about different walks of life." I answered, feeling the weight of her judgment. "My father is a carpenter, and my mother is a schoolteacher." "Oh, how quaint," she replied, her voice dripping with condescendence. "Hardworking people, I'm sure, but I suppose they couldn't offer you much in the way of a financial head start." The meal continued with her taking jabs at my small-town upbringing, my parents' humble occupations, and even my salary, which she had somehow learned about. Each comment was veiled in politeness, but sharp enough to cut. Mark was visibly uncomfortable, his attempts at defending me only seeming to amuse her more. As we left, Mark's father, Daniel, pulled me aside, offering a kind smile. "Anna, you handled yourself well. Don't let her get to you. She'll come around." In the car, Mark apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry, Anna. I didn't think she'd be this harsh." I sighed, a mix of hurt and determination in my voice. "It's okay, Mark. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I love you, and that's what matters." That night, as I lay in bed, the sting of his mother's words lingered. But beneath the hurt, a resolve was building. This was more than just about fitting in. It was a test of our love and my strength, and I was ready to face it head-on. As the wedding day approached, the air was thick with excitement and, unfortunately, growing tension. Marion, who had taken it upon herself to oversee the preparations, seemed to find a peculiar pleasure in belittling my ideas and choices at every turn. One afternoon, while discussing the wedding plans with Mark and his mother, the topic of the wedding dress came up. I had chosen a simple yet elegant gown that I felt reflected my personality. Mark's mother, however, had other ideas. "That dress, Anna? It's so plain. Don't you want to make a statement on your big day? After all, you're marrying into the family," she said, her voice laced with a patronizing tone. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, giving me a supportive look. Mom, Anna looks beautiful in that dress. It's her choice, and it's perfect. But his mother was relentless. Oh, Mark, let's be realistic. This is a high-profile event. People expect a certain standard. Anna, dear, you should consider something more fitting of our family's status. I tried to keep my voice steady, though I felt a sting at her words. I appreciate your concern, but I really love my dress. It's special to me. Her response was a dismissive wave. Well, it's your day, I suppose. But remember, it's not just about you. It's about how you represent us, too. As the days went by, her comments became more frequent and cutting. Marian criticized the flower arrangements, the menu choices, even the invitations. Each remark was a subtle dig at my background and my inability to meet her lofty standards. Mark and I had many conversations about this, often late into the night. I can't believe she's being so difficult, Mark would say, frustration evident in his voice. I wish she could just see how amazing you are, how you make me happy. I would lie there, feeling his arms around me, a mix of love and sorrow in my heart. I knew it wouldn't be easy, marrying into your family, but I didn't expect it to be this hard. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning within me. My parents and I had worked hard to make everything perfect, despite the constant criticisms from Marian. As I dressed in my simple but elegant gown, I hoped the day would pass without incident. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with love and heartfelt vows. Mark's eyes shone with affection and promise as we said our I do's. However, looming over the joyous occasion was the apprehension of the reception to follow, particularly the speeches. As expected, Marian took the microphone, her presence commanding the room's attention. The air was thick with expectation as she began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, she started, her voice loud and clear. Today, we have gathered to witness the union of my son Mark with Anna, let's say, a person from a different circle. Whispers spread through the guests. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. She continued, her words sharp and unyielding. While some may commend Mark for his charitable heart in lifting a beggar from the streets, we must be cautious. It's essential to keep our family's reputation and standards high, not let them be diluted by those who are clearly freeloaders, seeking to elevate their status by clinging to a family of higher standing. The room fell into a stunned silence. My parents looked at me, their faces a mix of shock and hurt. Mark's face was a mask of disbelief and anger. The guests, a mix of our friends and Mark's high society acquaintances, looked on uncomfortably, unsure of how to react. My heart sank, and a profound shame washed over me. Her words, so cruel in public, were more than just insults. They were a deliberate attempt to shame and belittle me in front of everyone we cared about. As she concluded her speech with a forced toast to our future, the applause was hesitant and muted. The room was enveloped in an awkward silence, the joy of the occasion marred by her venomous words. Mark stood up, his voice trembling slightly. I'm sorry, Anna. This isn't what I wanted. His eyes were apologetic, filled with a mix of love and sorrow. I looked around at the shocked faces of our guests, feeling incredibly humiliated. The weight of her words hung heavily in the air, casting a shadow over what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. The atmosphere at the reception was still tense following the disparaging speech by Mark's mother, when his grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor, a figure of respect and authority in the family, requested the microphone. Her poised demeanor and serious expression immediately drew the attention of all the guests. Good evening, she began, her voice clear and firm. I have something important to say. Anna, you have faced unwarranted criticism today, criticism that no one deserves, especially not on their wedding day. I looked up in surprise, and Mark, beside me, appeared equally astonished. Mrs. Eleanor then turned towards Marian. It seems we have forgotten our own past and where we come from. Let me remind everyone here, especially you, that before you were the lady of this house, you were a maid working under this very roof. It was here that you met your husband. A hush fell over the room. Mark's mother's face turned a shade paler, her eyes widening in shock and embarrassment. Mrs. Eleanor continued, her tone unyielding. So, for a former maid to stand here and scorn someone for their humble beginnings and modest means is not only ironic, but deeply hypocritical. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The room was engulfed in a stunned silence, every guest hanging on to Mrs. Eleanor's every word. You, who rose from poverty, should be the last person to judge or belittle another based on their background. We should be proud of Anna's integrity and strength, not deride her for it. The guests shifted uncomfortably, and whispers began to circulate. Marian sat motionless, the impact of Mrs. Eleanor's words evident on her face. In this family, we value character over wealth, kindness over status. Anna exemplifies these values, and I am proud to welcome her into our family, Mrs. Eleanor concluded, her gaze softening as she looked at me. The room erupted into applause, a stark contrast to the earlier muted response. Marian sat there, completely humbled, her earlier arrogance replaced by a visible sense of shame. To be honest, I didn't feel sorry for her. Mark whispered to me, "I never expected Grandma to stand up for us like this." I squeezed his hand, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. She's amazing. The rest of the evening felt lighter, the air cleared by Mrs. Eleanor's candid defense. Guests approached with warm congratulations and sincere smiles. I felt that they were all on my side. It felt damn good. As we left the reception, hand in hand, I felt a renewed sense of confidence and belonging. Mrs. Eleanor's words had shifted the dynamics, breaking the insidious plan of a cruel and not the smartest woman. The days after the wedding were heavy with an unspoken tension that hung over Mark's family like a dense fog. It all came to a head during a family meeting at Mrs. Eleanor's house, where the air was thick with expectation and apprehension. As we gathered in the grand living room, Mrs. Eleanor began without preamble, her voice firm and unwavering. "What happened at the wedding cannot be overlooked. The way you spoke to Anna, it was disgraceful." She addressed Marian directly, her eyes sharp. Mark's mother, usually so composed, looked smaller somehow, her usual confidence diminished. "Eleanor, I've already apologized to Anna," she said, her voice tinged with a hint of defiance. "It's not just about an apology," Mrs. Eleanor retorted. "Your actions reflect on this entire family. You've become accustomed to a lifestyle funded by the family's money without appreciating its value." Mark's father nodded in agreement, his expression serious. "My mother is right. You've lost sight of what's important." Mrs. Eleanor then laid out her decision, each word deliberate and clear. "I've decided to cut off the financial support you've been receiving. It's time you start contributing to this family instead of just taking. You'll need to find a job and learn to live within your means." The shock on Marian's face was evident. She turned to her husband, seeking support. "You can't agree with this? She can't just cut me off like this." But Daniel surprised her. "I stand with my mother on this. You've gone too far this time. It's for your own good." Marian's eyes filled with anger and disbelief, her usual poise crumbling under the weight of her new reality. Mark, who had been silent, spoke up, his voice steady. "Mom, Grandma's decision is harsh, but it's fair. You need to understand the impact of your words and actions." I sat there, watching the scene unfold, feeling a mix of sympathy and relief. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, a silent show of support. The meeting ended with Mark's mother in a state of shock, the reality of her situation slowly sinking in. She was obviously used to living at the expense of her family, and all thoughts of work caused her a migraine. I could barely contain a chuckle. As we left, Mark leaned in close. "I never thought I'd see the day when Mom would be at a loss for words, but maybe this is what she needs to change." I nodded, feeling a cautious hope for the future. Perhaps this will be a new beginning for her, for all of us. The family reckoning had been tough but necessary. It was a pivotal moment that promised to reshape the dynamics within Mark's family, hopefully for the better. The honeymoon was a welcome escape for Mark and me. As we walked along the sandy beaches, the soothing sound of the waves provided a much-needed respite from the recent family turmoil. One evening, as we watched the sunset, Mark wrapped his arm around me. I'm sorry our wedding turned into such a drama, Anna. I wish things had been different. I leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his embrace. It's okay, Mark. It wasn't your fault. What matters is we're together now, away from all that stress. Mark sighed, looking out over the ocean. Yeah, but when we go back, we'll have to face the reality of my mom's situation. It's going to be tough for her. I nodded, understanding his concern. Maybe this will be a chance for her to grow, to see things from a different perspective. We spent our days exploring and our nights talking about our future. The challenges we had faced seemed to strengthen our bond, reaffirming our love to each other. On our last night, as we packed our bags, Mark looked thoughtful. You know, Anna, everything that happened, it made me realize how important you are to me. I can't imagine going through life with anyone else. I smiled, touched by his words. I feel the same, Mark. We've been through a lot, but it's only made our relationship stronger. We can handle whatever comes our way, as long as we're together. As we headed back home, I felt a sense of peace. The honeymoon had not only been a break from the chaos, but a time for us to solidify our bond, to prepare ourselves for the new chapter in our lives. We were returning to a changed reality, but we were doing it together, stronger and more united than ever. The future was uncertain, but I was ready to face it with Mark by my side. Coming back from our honeymoon, Mark and I were unsure of what awaited us at his family home. The car ride was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts about the new family dynamics. As we arrived, the first thing we noticed was the absence of Mark's mother. Inside, we were greeted by his grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor, who wore a knowing smile. "Welcome back, you two. I suppose you're wondering about the changes here," she said, her tone light but with an undercurrent of seriousness. "Yes, where's Mom?" Mark asked, looking around. Mrs. Eleanor took a deep breath, her smile still in place. "Well, after you left, Marion caused quite a scene. Demanded that I restore her financial support. When I refused, she decided to leave. She's now living in a small apartment and, from what I hear, is looking for a job." Mark and I exchanged glances, the news sinking in. It was a drastic change from the luxurious life she was used to. "And there's more," Mrs. Eleanor continued, leaning in as if to share a secret. "Your father is considering a divorce. He's had enough of her antics. Seems like she finally pushed him too far. Well, she brought it upon herself." Mark's expression was one of shock mixed with a hint of relief. "I can't believe it. I mean, I knew things would change, but this is more than I expected." I reached out, touching his arm. "It's a lot to take in, but maybe this is for the best. A chance for everyone to start fresh, on a more honest footing." Dinner that night was an oddly serene affair. The absence of Mark's mother felt, but not in the way we had anticipated. The conversation was more open, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like there was a real sense of family. As we drove home later that evening, Mark was pensive. "I always hoped for a change, but I didn't expect it to happen like this. It's going to be a big adjustment for Mom." I nodded. "It's a tough situation, but maybe it's a necessary step for her to grow, and for your dad too, to find some peace." The ride home was reflective, both of us contemplating the new reality we were returning to. The family we left before the honeymoon was not the same one we were coming back to. It was a sobering thought, but in many ways, a hopeful one. Change, though painful at times, was often the path to something better. And we were ready to face it together.